My name is Lydia Edwards. I'm the District 1 City Councilor. I'm also chair of the Boston City Council Committee on Housing and Community Development. I'm joined here today by my colleague, Councilor Ed Flynn, and Councilor Michelle Wu. We will be joined at a later time by Councilor Flaherty, who is on his way. I want to remind you that this public hearing is being recorded and broadcast on Comcast 8 and RCM 82 Verizon 1964 and streamed on boston.gov/citycouncil-tv. Please silence your cell phones and other devices. We will be taking public testimony, and I would appreciate it if you would sign up in advance and to check the box off to testify. The public testimony, due to the amount of people here today, will be limited to 2 minutes per person. When you do testify, please state your name and affiliation / residence and limit your comments to the 2 minutes as I just stated. Today's hearing is on docket 0144. It's concerning the update of the IDP, or inclusionary development policy. Excellent. We've also been joined by my colleague, Councilor Kim Janing. So before we get started, I'm going to read some letters into the record, and then we are going to actually start with public testimony for some time, and then we will go into hearing from the administration. We have 2 panels tonight. First, reading into the record from my colleague, Councilor Siomo. Dear Councilor Edwards, unfortunately, due to a prior commitment, I am unable to attend today's Housing and Community Development hearing on the city's inclusionary development policy and affordable housing. While I intend to review the video of the hearing, I wanted to include some thoughts on IDP and affordable housing. I strongly support the IDP program and its mission to create affordable housing in the city of Boston. Since the program began in 2000, developers have directly created 2,599 income-restricted units, and IDP funds have created 1,414 income-restricted units. As we explore changes to the program, it is important to analyze how altering the formula will affect development in the city. As part of this process, we should be reaching out to housing advocates, nonprofit housing agencies, private housing developers, and Boston residents to get input not just on how much should be required of developers, but how the program should be implemented. Most importantly, the city should be able to independently make changes to this program and the city's linkage policy, which is why I support Mayor Walsh's home rule petition to grant the city such power, and I urge this body to approve that home rule expeditiously. Best regards, Mark Siomo. I apologize, I forgot to mention that we have translation services in Cantonese and Mandarin and Spanish. So if you need any interpretive services, you can see Melissa or Gabriela is standing up to do the Spanish translation for anybody who needs that. Again, this hearing is sponsored by Councilors Michael Flaherty, Ed Flynn, and myself, and this hearing was referred to our committee on January 9th. Before we begin, I'm going to have a brief statement, and then I'll invite my colleagues to also have brief statements, and then we'll go right to public testimony. I will note briefly that I strongly support efforts to update the inclusionary development policy. In March, my office released a policy brief recommending the city model higher affordability requirements, expand data reporting on beneficiaries of inclusionary development, address issues with 8 or 9 unit buildings, and consider targeted support through the IDP fund for permanently affordable community housing, such as land trusts. I look forward to discussing the IDP and to hearing from the administration and the community about their goals, study of, and concerns of the program. I also want to note that the BPDA is hosting a series of neighborhood meetings on June 12th, June 18th, and June 25th, and that information about the IDP update is available on their website. Would you like to make an opening comment, Councilor Flynn?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards, and thank you to the Walsh administration, to our community advocates for being here for this important hearing. Again, thank you to Councilors Edwards, Councilor Flaherty, for being partners on this. It has been well documented that Boston has a housing affordability crisis. I have heard from my constituents in my district about how they could not afford to live in the city, and that working families and seniors, persons with disabilities, are being pushed out of their communities and homes. I believe that housing is a human right. It is also an issue of racial equity and economic justice as well. I want to thank many organizations that are here today. The Chinese Progressive Association for their work in fighting displacement in our neighborhoods, as well as organizations like the Massachusetts Affordable Housing Alliance, Right to the City, the Boston Tenants Organization, and the IDP Coalition for their work also. In my district, many of the families are low income. In fact, 24% of residents in Chinatown are in poverty, and the average income in Chinatown is around $25,000 a year. Our city needs affordable housing for our working families to stay in the city, and we need to make sure that our IDP program is effective in providing affordable housing that our communities need, and that it is enforced as well. I'll give you 2 examples on enforcement in my district. A foreign investor brought one of the historic row houses in Chinatown at 9 Johnny Court and wants to rebuild the 2-unit house into 5 units, and the families living there were evicted. Meanwhile, the building was empty for 2 years before being transferred to an LLC, and the owner was not required to provide any affordable housing. Another one is at 135 Athens Street in South Boston, where the developer would rather take the penalty for violating IDP than actually providing affordable units. This project was approved for 15 units and required to provide 2 affordable units. However, the developer sold those 2 units at market rate and instead just took the $600,000 fine. We need to strengthen our IDP policy, so what I described above won't happen again. I believe that we should also increase the IDP from our current 13% to at least 17% or 18%, and look at lowering the threshold for requiring IDP so that a development with, say, 6 units would be required to have affordable units. We should also see if developers with projects that are not required to have affordable units can contribute to the Affordable Housing Fund. Even if you build less than 10 units, developers should still be asked to contribute in building more affordable housing. We also need to be bold in innovative ideas to solve our current housing crisis. One idea is to partner with struggling shopping plazas in our neighborhoods and help them development with commercial on the bottom and housing on top. There's also ample parking on those sites, and these owners will have the opportunity to renovate their property as well. I'm looking forward to working with everyone here to strengthen our IDP program and to ensure that our city remains diverse and vibrant for all, especially for our elderly, for low-income families, persons with disabilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We've been joined by some more of my colleagues. Councillor Anissa Sabi-George has joined us, and so is Councillor Frank Baker. We're going to move on. Councillor Wu, if you have any opening remarks?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to say I'm very sorry I have to run out, but wanted to express my support to the sponsors for making sure we're having a public conversation about this, to the chair for her work on everything housing and affordability and stability related, and that I would support increasing the requirement to make sure that we are generating more resources commensurate with the level of development that's happening across the city and that other cities around us are pursuing. So I think this is an important conversation. Thank you for having it, and I will follow and watch, but I'm sorry I have to step out. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Janey?
Just briefly, I want to thank you and my colleagues at Flynn for introducing this important hearing order. I want to thank all of the advocates for their constant advocacy around this very important issue. I believe, as I've said before, that there are several tools in our toolbox that we are not using, and so I think this is a very important conversation to see what more we can do in our city to make sure that all of our residents can afford to stay in our city. So thank you for bringing this up. I'm looking forward to a productive hearing.
Thank you. Councillor Sabi-George.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the co-sponsors for this hearing order. I look forward to what we learned today. I think it's an interesting, necessary conversation, not just an interesting conversation, one that we have to have as the city continues to grow, as the number of families experiencing homelessness also grows. We need to have these discussions, these important discussions, sometimes difficult ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baker. Good. Okay. Okay, as I stated at the intro, we're going to go ahead and start with public testimony. And again, folks will have 2 minutes each. So I'm going to go ahead and call up the first 4 folks who have signed up or who are here. We'll call you if you are inclined to speak. Please come forward. Denise Buss, Holly Berry, Violin Kung, and Nisha McDonald. You can both line up at both of the microphones.
Good afternoon or good evening, councilors. Thank you for having me. My name is Denise Buss. I am the senior organizer for Boston Tenant Coalition, also part of the Inclusionary Development Policy Coalition, and a Rosendale resident. I want to say today that I thank you for having this conversation because we need the community's voice in order to know what's really missing in their homes and in their communities. So I think it's really important that we continue to get the feedback from community and take that into consideration. So I just wanted to take a moment to say something personal about affordable housing. I grew up in subsidized housing, and because of that, I was able to do a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have the opportunity to do if I hadn't, as a child, I never had to think about housing insecurity because my mom had a place and I didn't have to worry about, where would I sleep or what food would I eat because, again, affordable housing gave me that opportunity. People in Boston are struggling. Housing is a right. People should be able to have a roof over their heads. Everything is revolved around housing. You can't get a good job unless you have an address. You can't get health insurance. You can't, get all these things that people need in order to survive in community. And so having a tool like the IDP is one of the things that we really need to take advantage of because IDP is just one tool out of the toolkit, but we need to make sure that all of the tools are working towards making affordable housing possible. The IDP is a great tool, like I said before, but it's missing a lot of people within its barriers. A lot of the units that are on the market right now, considered affordable, are leaving folks who, are having the most problem and struggling finding housing. And they're the population that really keeps Boston together. And they're what makes Boston strong. And so we need to make sure that we're supporting them because they're supporting us all the time. And so making sure that the IDP works for all of the Boston residents, not just folks that have a college education, that have a higher income, or even what people would consider middle income. We have to think about the people that are also low income, struggling, have families with disabilities, have children, are single mothers or fathers. We can't leave anyone out. And so we have to make sure that the IDP is doing that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Holly Berry. Sarah Holly. Okay. Moving on to Violin Kung. Okay.
Because I need interpreter, can I have more time?
Yes.
Okay. 咁咧，我叫鄺寶蓮咧，我係一個我喺前進會做，但係其實我係波士頓居民。
So, Baolin Kwang, I'm organizer with the Chinese Progressive Association and also a Boston resident.
我可以分享我嘅個人經驗，講點解呢個 IDP 咧需要修改。
So I want to share my personal experience, how we can make the IDP a better policy.
因為咧，我當時我住喺唐人街嗰時咧，我申請，我依家好幸運，我買咗屋抽籤喺布拉頓嗰度有啲可負擔性嘅房屋係自己買落嚟嘅，但係我去申請嘅過程咧，我經過6年啊。
So first of all, I am one of the fortunate people who went through the lottery process through the IDP program. So I own a condo now in Britton, but that process to get there was long.
6 year。因為咧，我去申請嘅時候咧，我一開始嗰時，因為咧喺唐人街，我好想去租啲屋咧。嗰時我未做工，我先生一個人做，我個女出世，我哋想去申請好多房屋咧，唔俾話我啲收入唔夠啊，所以個 IDP 咧，我哋希望可以改到咧，真係起到係啲社區根據社區收入起嗰啲平啲嘅咯。
So even before I applied, I was able to get my own condo. I actually was a long-time Chinatown resident, and we lived in Chauncey House, but the rent was low. But when we tried to apply other places through the lottery program, actually I was often told that my income was too low at that time. I have a new baby. Only my husband was working, so actually our income was too low for a lot of the IDP affordable units.
呢個唔係我一個人，其實我哋唐人街有好多家庭咧，因為佢有細路嘅時候咧，佢冇辦法兩個人去做工，因為所以咧，如果 IDP 將來可以改起多啲家庭式嘅，因為依家全部起嗰啲係冇房嘅咧，根本啲家庭冇辦法申請到啊。
So for most people who are in a community, the people who can kind of afford to rent are kind of more like the studio price, but actually the need is actually more family housing, and they're also the family is the ones that who are most difficult in applying for housing.
咁我依家住喺布拉頓咧，又面對同樣嘅問題，因為喺布拉頓嗰度咧，依家起咗個新嘅地鐵，跟住咧佢有好多豪華發展入嚟，但係我哋問嘅時候，佢哋冇講，都好似都係起一房冇房嗰啲，佢話俾啲專業人士喎，咁我哋啲家庭放喺邊度去啊？
So many people might know in Austin, Brighton, there's a development boom. I've been to some of the community meetings. I often hear developers saying that they only are building one bedroom or studio. And that's really for people who, they're not suitable for family for the most part.
咁我住布拉頓嗰度其實係即係擁有房屋嘅比率係最少嘅，多數係租嘅。咁我哋希望咧可以起。 將來成個波士頓起多啲可負擔性房屋咧，係俾啲工人階級可以買落嚟、長住落嚟，或者起啲平啲嘅，即係個 AMI 低啲嘅。
So also in Brighton actually is one of the communities with the lowest number of home ownership. Most of the residents are renters. But it's not because people didn't want to own, but they couldn't afford to own. And so I feel like I would encourage for the IDP program to have more ownership opportunities for working families at a lower area median income.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nisha McDonald. Did I pronounce the name correctly?
No, but it's okay.
Well,
it happens.
correct me. I'm happy to learn. I'd prefer to say it right.
So my name is Nisha McDonald.
Thank you.
Born and raised in Dorchester. Just graduated last week from UMass Boston, degree in community development. Thank you. And I spent the past few semesters working with the Boston Tenant Coalition. And what we've researched is IDP, but we also compared it to 6 other cities' IDP policies. It was San Francisco, Seattle, Washington, D.C., New York, Somerville, Cambridge. And I won't go into the details of that, but what we found is that Boston just flat out lies somewhere in the middle of the pack. And no matter how you rank it, Boston, it shows, compared to these other cities, is not leading the way in this affordable housing crisis or championing this crisis. One of the main issues is that Boston uses the Department of Community Development and Housing, HUD's, fair market rent to determine the area median income. But the issue is that this statistic pulls data from half of Massachusetts, like towns like Brookline, Wellesley, Lexington. And so it determines the area median income for the city is north of $100,000, when in reality census data shows it's closer to $60,000. And that's where a major discrepancy lies with the IDP basing its targeted income levels off of this statistic. And IDP is a local program with local repercussions. And if we continue to use this 70% targeted income level, this based off this federally determined statistic, we're basically excluding most of the residents of Boston from these developments. And just to kind of compare to one of the cities, New York has one of the most rigorous affordable housing requirements in the country. And just to make a kind of quick sports metaphor, developers still come there to build. If the Yankees or the Jets were beating the Red Sox or the Patriots the way that New York is outpacing the city of Boston with affordable housing, we would have to do something. We would feel we have to do something about it. And this is our opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're
Do you
welcome.
have the report on the comparisons, or
I don't have it with me, but I can get it to you.
can you make it available to us?
Sure thing.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Just going to continue on. Okay. John Dubois, Louise Baxter, Siobhan OConnor. Again, if I've incorrectly stated your name, I apologize. And Sonia Babata. Feel free to correct me when you're at the microphone. We can start with John. Is John out here? Okay. Louise Baxter?
Yeah, I'm Louise Baxter. I'm associated with Mass Senior Action, Right to the City, and ACE, Alternates for Community Environment, and South Boston is my neighborhood. And like I used to know people that did home maintenance and handyman work, they're all gone now. The people you know. Broadway Station used to be a bunch of rooming houses, and I never felt unsafe. And now it's a bunch of luxury condos. And also, I came home the other Monday night, discovered the corner on Dorchester Street and West Broadway, the Dunkin' Donuts, hold the hostel block with Dunkin' Donuts and other buildings was gone. Get off the bus, the dollar store was having its closure sale. It was pretty much empty. We're losing that because they're converting that building to condos. So about all we have left now is CVS. And on my block, on Athens Street, used to be a parking lot across from me, and they converted it into condos. And that was a few years back, a long time. And now they're dumping, they're doing other buildings on my block, and our street is 13 feet wide, the sidewalk's 3 feet wide, and they're dumping all the parking entrances and exits from the condos onto our street. And some people's houses, one person had to leave temporarily because they shook her house.
Thank you. Thank you. Siobhan OConnor. Again, apologize if I mispronounce your name.
Hi, it's Siobhan OConnor.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm a resident right now at Our Ladies Guild House in Kenmore Square. I'm having trouble finding housing, and the thing is, I've always had a residence address in Boston. My father was in the Army. He served the U.S. Army and paid taxes to the state of Massachusetts. So I have always had a residence in Boston. So it's hard for me right now to find a housing and stuff like that.
Right.
I don't know what else to say.
It's okay. You have time. Sonia?
Hi.
Hi.
Last name is Aliyah. It's easier than it looks. So I am a Fenway resident, and I've been working in the city of Boston for almost 9 years. I've lived in Somerville before till about 2015 because it was more affordable than being in Boston. I actually got priced out of Davis Square, and somehow Fenway was cheaper than staying in Davis, which is how I ended up in Boston proper. I didn't know I qualified for the lottery until about 6 months before the Beverly applications were released. And even then, I did not find out from any sort of city marketing. I found out through my aunt, who lives in New York City, who had read about the project in the New York Times, I think. I did not find out about the Beverly through anything here. I did apply. I got really lucky. I was approved. But what I was approved for was $500 more than what I was paying in the private rental market. I was also approved for a unit that was at the 100% AMI threshold, even though my income that year was about the 80% AMI threshold. My approval email was sent at 8:30 p.m. on December 20th. And on the 21st morning, I emailed 5 people asking about the AMI discrepancy. I did not get any response. I left voicemails. That approval email also said I had 48 hours to decide whether or not to move forward with the process. I couldn't get answers in the 3 days before Christmas to inform my decision on whether or not to take that unit. I mean, it was pretty obvious it was $500 more than what I was paying, so I did give it up. But to this day, I do not understand IDP implementation for those income thresholds and how it's supposed to help when the unit I'm being offered is not something I can afford. I'm currently in the midst of a job transition, and I know that if I decide to leave the city for my next opportunity, I will not be able to afford to move back. And that is the biggest thing weighing on me right now.
Thank you. We have Barbara Parmenter and Stephen Mahmoud.
Hello, I'm Barbara Parmenter, and I represent the Brighton-Allston Community Coalition. I'm on their steering committee. We have over 500 members, both renters and homeowners in Allston-Brighton. And first of all, thank you so much for having this hearing. Thank you all the housing advocates for doing the work for this. The BACC strongly supports efforts to update the inclusionary policy, and especially in terms of Allston-Brighton, increasing the set-aside to 20% and the corresponding percentage for off-site units. We're also, as earlier speakers have talked about, strongly supportive of family creating affordable housing for families and homeownership opportunities. Again, thank you so much.
Thank you. I don't know if it's okay, Steve, real quick, if Rep. Santiago is still here and wanted to say something. I apologize. I was just going to pull in the rep real quick.
Good evening. My name is John Santiago, and I currently serve as the state representative for the 9th Suffolk District, which includes the South End, Back Bay, Roxbury, and Fenway neighborhoods of Boston. First, I'd like to thank City Councilor Lydia Edwards, as well as her colleagues, for their steadfast commitment to social justice and housing affordability. I appreciate you hosting this hearing and for the opportunity to speak in support of strengthening Boston's inclusionary development policy. I'm here today largely as a result of multiple meetings I've had with the Fenway CDC, and through their advocacy and our partnership has taught me much about the many housing challenges our city and Commonwealth face. Through our meetings, they have not only advised me on what legislation to sponsor, but on how to better represent some of my most vulnerable constituents. And we've already had some successes. I had the privilege to work alongside them while lobbying Attorney General Maura Healey to investigate housing discrimination in the Fenway. Our effort successfully halted multiple evictions and will hopefully lead to the preservation of those affordable housing units. And as our relationship continues to grow, I told them that they could count on me to stand with them as we advocate for housing justice at the city and state levels, be it through testimony, legislation, and action. They've asked me to accompany them today, and that's what brings me here. I'm joined by the Fenway CDC and several of my constituents from across the district, all of whom will testify to the importance of strengthening the IDP. You will hear about how they have been impacted by the rising prices and extensive development, as well as what steps can be taken to mitigate the very real impact of our constituents. Because like many of you, I hear from concerned neighbors every single day about the frightening pace and scale of new developments throughout the city. Additionally, I hear about the increasing pressures on individuals and families struggling to maintain their housing. While it is encouraging to see Boston thriving and growing, it is essential that we preserve and expand our affordable housing stock. The current inclusionary development policy has provided much needed affordable housing units and funding, but I believe that we should explore how to maximize public benefit from private development, creating the strongest possible IDP that truly meets residents' needs. The House of Representatives has already taken action to bolster affordable housing programs. In our fiscal year 20 budget, the House increased Massachusetts rental voucher program funding by 10%, bringing it up to $110 million. The House also passed a $6.3 million increase in affordable public housing subsidies. Lastly, I've co-sponsored 17 housing bills this session, including legislation to codify Boston's IDP into the zoning code, a real estate transaction fee bill, and a tenant's right to purchase bill. No doubt more work is necessary, but I remain optimistic in the direction we're headed. I hope that the state's increasing support for housing programs supplements the city's effort to preserve and expand desperately needed affordable housing. Thank you again for facilitating this robust community engagement process and for hearing our testimony this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Steve?
Thank you, City Councilor, and I have to thank you very much for actually putting a lot of these community meetings together, because if it weren't for them, I would not have become so aware of the BPDA and its process and in the IDP, which definitely needs a tremendous amount of upgrades. I think at this point, the BPDA's current policies kind of seems to ignore the fact that reurbanization is a huge thing. I live in East Boston myself, which has seen tremendous amount of new development that just is mind-boggling to me. And while we're dealing with that, there's a need to go well beyond. I mean, the IDP is the closest thing that we have to a rent control without a rent control in the state. And we need to be thinking about what community this is for. Is it for the current residents, or is it the residents of the future? If it's the residents of the future, it's going to price all of us out, including myself. I work for a nonprofit. I don't have a high income. I'm lucky, fortunate for the moment, but I've been on the IDP list for quite some time and have not found anything that's fitting my range. My income for my household is between the 30% and the 60%, which I very rarely ever see anything coming from the BPDA on. And it seems that there's no interest in actually going that route. So I want to support what the resident who was from the Boston tenants talking about the AMI needing to be updated. It does need to reflect exactly what's in the community. It cannot be doing this outside the community and outside of the city elements. That's really ridiculous to see this going forward. Furthermore, the other parts that I'm thinking about is the land is a key thing, and in the case of East Boston, I know land is a touchy topic, but when it comes to who lives here versus who has the land, and I rather the residents actually have the voice instead of the people who own the land. I know there's some crossover, but when we're dealing with this huge area like Suffolk Downs, they seem to have a stronger voice than the residents do, and that's not right. It shouldn't be down to like how much you own and how much money you have. It should really be about how many votes you have, and that's more important to me. So thank you for your time. Thank you for the testimony.
Thank you. I apologize, I think it's Martin Roeder. Liz Britton. Laurie Lobos. And Jacqueline Yesian.
Thank you. My name is Martin Reto. I live in the Back Bay. I'm chair of the Neighborhood Association of the Back Bay. Let me say, first of all, that I also agree with the idea that the AMI, as it is currently calculated, does not make sense given the circumstances in Boston proper itself. Now, we recognize that different neighborhoods have very different experiences, priorities, and capabilities in terms of the land that's available, the buildings that are already there. So let me share a bit some of the experiences that we've had in the Back Bay, which is that most developments are oriented towards very high-end, very expensive condos. And I submit that that is not something that Boston needs more of. Our frustration is that, let's say, the developer then decides to take the buyout option, we have no idea what happens to that money. And while sometimes we're looked on as being fairly selfish or elitist perhaps in the way in which we think about the rest of the city, in fact we recognize that we depend also, we're mutually independent upon the fabric of the city. And we would like to have the opportunity to have a say in how the money that's generated for IDP because of projects that take place within the Back Bay is in the end dispersed. And there seems to be a general issue here of the balance of power and influence. We would like to see communities, neighborhoods, and indeed the City Council itself have more of a say in the structure and operation of the IDP for the benefit of residents. We've obviously nothing against the city, nothing against the BPDA, but it does seem that sometimes they dominate the way in which this program is run and don't necessarily pay sufficient attention to the needs and desires of communities. So that's the thought I would leave with you. And if you can come up with some ways in which you can ensure that communities and neighborhoods of all kinds and the City Council itself have more of an influence over the way in which the IDP is structured and works in practice, I think that would help. Diversity is a word that can be very useful in helping shape the way in which decisions get taken. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Liz?
Chelsea Green?
I had Liz Britton.
Thank you for the opportunities to speak. My name is Liz Braden. I'm a candidate for Boston City Council from District 9, Alston, Brighton. We have a housing crisis all across the city, but in Alston, Brighton, we have a particular situation that is of a great concern. We are building thousands and thousands of new units of housing. Most of it is in the form of studios and one-bedrooms. We have very little family-size units being built, and we're not those apartment buildings don't have amenities that are enhance the lives of families and children. Also, the IDP, the pricing is set at 70%, 80%, and up to 150% of the AMI. We do not get more. We desperately need more deeply affordable housing in Alston, Brighton. We have, as someone has recently said, we have a wait list at our CDC of 17,000 people waiting for housing in Alston, Brighton. And we really need to do something very urgently to reverse this situation and have more deeply affordable housing and actually to increase the IDP to 20%. Thank you.
Thank you. Laurie Lobos?
Is that me? Yeah.
Correct me, I apologize.
Is this thing on? My name is Laurie Lobos. I'm a resident of Dorchester. I was born and raised there. I lived in Oakland for a long time and saw the devastating effects of displacement out there, and was forced to come back home where I could stay with family while I got back on my feet. I did finally find an apartment in Dorchester, which I'm very grateful for after being housing unstable for about 5 years. And I'm happy to be where I grew up. My intention is to stay. I have deep ties to my community, particularly the values in my community, or what I learned, which is to look out for each other and care for each other, and share your resources, right? Because it might be you the next month that's a little bit short. All that said, I don't have a lot to add, I think, but to the points that people have made already. Primarily, the housing should be built and affordable for the people who live here now. We all know that there's a crisis. There's a displacement crisis. My neighbors are being forced out. A lot of my family members can't afford to live in the city anymore. Friends who even work for the city, yes, they're past their 10 years, but can't afford to live in the city. the current IDP policy at 70% AMI, I think I'm getting this right? It's not affordable for the people who need it. So primarily, I want to say we need to build, this policy needs to be able to provide housing for the people who live here now. It should match the incomes and needs of residents of Boston. Most people in Boston, or at least I know in Dorchester, most people make under $50,000 a year. Is that correct for Boston as well, I believe? So why do we have a policy that is based on an AMI that doesn't reflect the incomes of people in Boston? You talked about needing like bold solutions. The bold solution is to be bold, like create an IDP policy that addresses the needs of the people who live here. Yes, more people are going to be moving into the city, but if we don't match those needs, then you're going to create a whole different Boston. You're going to create a Boston that is not for working people, that continues to push out working class communities, particularly communities of color, and that's not the community I want to live in, although I do want to live here, but I probably will be pushed out. So please, be bold. I think that at least a third of the housing in Boston should be actually affordable, and it should be affordable at the 40% AMI level. That's what most residents make. That's the greatest need. So that's what we should do. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I have Jacqueline. Jacqueline. Yessian.
Hi.
Thank you.
I'm Jacqueline Yessian. Thank you. I was fortunate enough to attend the first hearing that you had for City Council. And one thing, Lydia, that you said was make sure that the City Council is part of the changes. And I just want to say I thank you for that, and I reiterate that. I want you to do that too, and also the neighborhoods. And the other thing that has struck me is that there must be other ways besides waiting for developers to want to build something to fund housing. So I just hope that we will task our BPDA to come up with alternatives, including requiring housing to be not luxury, because that would be one way of helping another group of people that need housing. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. John Waukee, Chelsea Green, David Lahijaniha, Elizabeth Charney? Johnny, okay.
Should I hand these things off?
And just to reiterate, everyone's been really good in terms of time, but we're trying to make sure folks can get, so it's about 2 minutes.
Okay, so very quickly, my name is John Waukee. I work at an organization called Green Roots. I've been a 15-year resident of East Boston, and I would reiterate a lot of what's been said here. The map that you've just been handed out is that famous HUD fair market rate area that we've been talking about, and it's a gerrymandered green blob along the East Coast with a tendril going out. And you'll notice it very assiduously avoids communities like Lawrence, Lowell, Fitchburg, Worcester, Brockton. Yes. So of the 20 lowest income municipalities in the Commonwealth, 0 are within this green area. This is, I believe, from 2018 data. 2017, we had 3 of the lowest of the top 20. 3 of them were in this area. And then last year, none of them are in this area. So basically, the AMI is sort of acting as a ringer to ring out low-income people from eastern Massachusetts, from this green area, basically. So definitely reiterate what people said here, and I would also reiterate the request to be bold, because when we talk about these things, especially with our colleagues in the advocacy community and the CDCs, the answer usually is we just need HUD to come up with more money. Well, there's a massive wealth inequity going on, and Boston is one of the ground zeros of this across the country. And that's because our federal government has stopped taxing corporations and the wealthy, and they've stopped, of the money they do collect, they've stopped giving it to things like HUD. So we don't have the money to put into the programs that we've been doing for years. So we need to think of some other way to get at, why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. If the money is being concentrated in the super wealthy in this town that are buying up million-dollar condos, multi-million-dollar condos downtown, we should be looking for that same source for the funding necessary for a BOLD program that IDP could potentially be. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Chelsea Green.
Hi, my name is Chelsea Green. I am a proud Alston resident, and I am a graduate student at Harvard's Department of Government. And I'm here to emphasize 2 key points. The first is that the goal of the IDP should be to preserve the quality and variety of housing available for Boston residents. The second is that the best way to do that is to tip the scales of developer calculations toward keeping IDP units as IDP over contributing toward a general IDP fund. The proposed IDP policy changes rely upon developers making decisions based on several kinds of calculations. Is it more profitable to keep my IDP units designated as IDP and in fact IDP, or is it more profitable for me to contribute to the IDP fund? And there are lots of factors that go into this, including whether paying this $380,000 for like a Zone A unit is worth it. So how much you anticipate charging for rent, the rate at which you anticipate the market is going to go up over the coming decades, and of course how long you're going to be alive to own the building. I built a simple model on my walk over here, calculating that it would take very conservatively between 15 and 20 years for it to become more profitable to basically contribute to this IDP fund over just keeping the IDP unit low income. The problem with this is that the 2018 IDP report shows that the quality and the variety of housing provided by the fund versus what is actually available to residents, it just doesn't even compare, particularly with regards to location. And so my main suggestion basically today is to you elected representatives to raise those contributions per unit for zones A, B, and C by a significant amount. And again, taking into account various calculations, you could come up with models to kind of simulate how much you think you want to push developers, but I think that that would be a really important start to improving this policy. Thank you.
Thank you. David?
Good evening, Madam Council. My name is David. I'm East Boston resident since 1985, also at the same apartment. Back in the 70s, we had problem. Back in the 80s, we had the same problem, but previous administration had a project on South Bremen Street. It was 1,500 units. According to the previous administration, I was on every meeting they had, and they agreed 500 of those goes to low affordable housing. Today, we don't know what affordable housing is. I did my own homework on there, and I find out that some people who do the math, they are greedy for their own pocket. What they did was they took the executive of a Fidelity and Putnam Investment who makes over $25 million a year and add my low income, and the time I'm in a construction, I get laid off to his, and that became AMI. How do we justify that? Most of them live in New Hampshire, Maine, and they have Fidelity give them the right to the city. They only work in this city, collect our taxes, and they're pushing us out. So another issue in East Boston is people cannot sleep and wake up the next day and the rent go $1,000 increase. Now, my suggestion is for East Boston, we can apply it and see if that works. He can be affected to the other part of the city, Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, Brighton, Alston. The people who were around before this new city council know that we never have this crisis unless permit was given. Why do city council does not hold the permit until they deliver that 30% of affordable housing? I'm not blaming you guys. It's just another tool in your tool bag can be used. However, in order for them to say, yeah, we met them, how many people of us, families, are a single guy and you need one suitcase and half a drawers and stuff to come into those condos they're building? If you look at East Boston again, they're taking a prime land on a waterfront property and they're just building luxury condos. I need an apartment. I'm getting evicted by Thursday in a housing court. I don't need to catch up with the Joneses. So does 1,000 people in East Boston. Another thing the city's wasting their money is, the Eversource in East Boston, they bring in a high voltage power line, which before city council got elected, I was in the first meeting. That power line coming from a shore to city council next to the fish company is a pure ammonia tank in there. I did it, I prove it. If that line blew up, I don't think anyone can survive the East Boston. I'm an electrician, and I know that high voltage is very strong. Give the message to the rest of the city, they should take that power and put it into the Massport property. That's how our community can survive. Also, keep building all these condos. Where is anybody know what the dimension of the condos are? 99 Sumner Street, where's the dimension of the condos? Is it ready? Is it been rise from a street level 26 feet? As we know, the water is rising, and nobody wants to pay attention to that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. We have 3 more, and then we're going to go to the administrative panel. Elizabeth Charney, Timothy Ney, and then Emily Ratliff.
I'm Elizabeth Charney, and I live in Jamaica Plain. I'm lucky to be a homeowner. If I didn't own a home now, I wouldn't be able to afford one in Boston. I'm involved with the Stony Brook Neighborhood Association, and I'm very caring about the housing crisis that we're going through. And some other people here are all about affordable housing, which I applaud. However, I look very young, but I want to tell you, I know it was our very own Senator Edward Brooke who pushed through the public housing because his dad said to him, 25% of your budget has to go towards housing. And so that was the beginning of our public and subsidized housing, which is important. So when I hear that people are paying 50 to 70% of their salaries to house themselves, it's very scary. How are they contributing to the economy? How are they paying their health bills for the children? How are they getting their car fixed? How are they going to school? It goes on and on. You want us to contribute to the economy, then we have to pay an affordable rent. I also would like to remind the Boston Redevelopment Authority and the Boston Planning Division that Boston does have a sad history of displacing people. I came to Boston, I joke about being an import because I came for college, and the first thing I heard about, which was before I arrived, was the West End, which continues to have repercussions today when we demolished a neighborhood and built 2 towers. I was a student who came to the city council when the Mass Avenue building across from the Christian Science, the elderly and poor were getting displaced when the Christian Science building was having their huge renovations, and it just keeps going on. So I wanted to point out the history and encourage everybody to come up with a better plan. It's almost embarrassing to me to go to a city like Denver, and then they have this absolutely gorgeous area that was industrialized, that they renovated, preserved the building, and turned it into retail, business, residences, and it's gorgeous, and you can park and do business and go to restaurants there, so that's important. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Timothy Ney?
Yes. My name is Timothy Ney, and I want to thank you for having this hearing in the evening. It makes it very convenient for working people. I'm a resident of the Fenway. I've watched the development there for 17 years. As a husband, as a parent, as a working artist. And the last couple of years I've been doing an oral history of the Fenway. And it wasn't an intended theme, but the reoccurring theme in talking to longer-term residents in the Fenway and also younger residents is displacement. Enough has been said in terms of where Boston has gone. We're obviously in probably the third largest economic boom in history, the Industrial Revolution, the filling of the Back Bay, and now what we have. I looked at the 2018 IDP report, and I commend the agency and the city for issuing that report. It has very good statistics and a vision for the future, but with 53 to 69,000 units planned by 2030, or at least what the mayor has requested, and only 15,820 of those being income restricted. Is that sufficient when the waiting list in Alston and Brighton is 17,000? I would like to leave two points from my thinking. One is that the agency, since the word planning has now been added to the BRA, is that there needs to be planning where we aggregate information and not look at each development under one Article 80 public hearing, because it's very, very narrow, single vision in terms of looking at Boston's development. And if the BPDA doesn't do that planning, who is going to do an overall planning for the city of Boston? And then second, we shouldn't be afraid that we're somehow going to scare off the developers or scare off capital. I mean, we certainly want to attract FDI, foreign direct investment, and we've seen that with Scape's recent investments in Boston. We've seen financial vehicles from Chinese financing coming to build large structures. And we should remember that right now, the borrowing costs are currently lower than any time in the founding of the U.S. Since the Federal Reserve Bank was formed in 1913. So raising the amount of the ITP contribution in this environment and in the future environment is not going to denigrate the development of Boston. And it's not going to, we shouldn't continue to drive out the population that we have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Before we switch to the, come forward. Emily?
Emily Ratliff.
Thank you.
I'm a resident of a high-end JP 9-unit condo association with one affordable unit. One affordable unit is better than none, but one is not enough. I'm a member of Surge Boston, showing up for racial justice. I don't like being the last speaker because I don't feel like I'm going to give the macro view. The macro view is we need more affordable housing. Nobody in this room wants to live in an all-white, rich city. We want the diversity of workers that live here. Our community is made up of people who live here and who work here. People who work here should be able to afford to live here. We need 30% minimum of affordable housing in this city. I've been here for 12 years. All of us are enriched by living with people who have different lived experiences than we do. And I gotta say, some of these new condos that are being thrown up are just plain ugly. They're throwing them up fast, and they're not checking with the communities to see if they are a benefit. They have no character. There's a box on Burroughs Street in Jamaica Plain that is awful. It's just awful. We want diversity in our neighborhoods, both in our workforce and our residents. There was a recent study that $8 is the wealth of a typical the mean of a black family in Boston. $240,000 is the mean income or wealth of a white family. How are we going to have a community with any diversity of color if we don't have more affordable housing? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to have the administration step up, and I'm going to take a 2-minute break.
How you doing, right?
Just wanted to welcome everyone back. We're back from a brief pause in this hearing on our IDP. I also wanted to welcome one of the co-filers for this hearing, Councillor Flaherty, and we had all given some welcoming remarks when we started. Did you want that opportunity?
Just brief, Madam Chair, and it's obviously good to see you, and thank you and Councillor Flynn for co-sponsoring, as well as our colleagues for attending, and particularly kudos to your great work on these very critical issues, your long-time work on these critical issues. So as folks know, our city is experiencing an era of unprecedented growth and development. All of my colleagues, but particularly my colleagues representing South Boston and Chinatown, like Councillor Flynn, and also East Boston and Charlestown, like Councillor Edwards, they hear it every day, whether it's through calls and emails to their office, at community meetings, coffee shops, restaurants in their districts. The development is taking its toll on many residents. So a lot of our residents are unable to afford the rents. They're unable to buy homes and condominiums, or simply be able to afford the rising property taxes on homes that they've lived in for decades. So the city's inclusionary zoning policy is probably our best tool and our best leverage against private development to build affordable units. The policy makes significant contributions to our affordable housing stock. It's also currently being evaluated for some policy updates. In evaluating the updates to the IDP citywide, we also need to have conversations about policy compliance. There have been instances where projects have violated the IDP requirements, resulting in permanent loss of designated affordable units. I'm also looking forward to having a conversation with the BPDA, D&D, members of the local community development corporations, housing advocates, others, as how we can make updates to the IDP and to ensure that we're building enough affordable housing. I'm also looking forward to hearing about how we can better ensure policy compliance. So through the chair, I thank you for the opportunity. Look forward to hearing additional testimony, as well as hearing from the administration and our other panel. Thank you, Councilor Rhodes.
Thank you. So we're just wanted to make sure, because I think we have a lot of questions for the administration, but we have a second panel after this, and just to let folks know, we are going to continue public testimony as well. So we had about 20 people testify. We're going to go to the administration, and then we're going to continue on with our panel of advocates. And again, thank you for those who are here tonight to voice your opinion. I really do appreciate all of the work you've done in and outside of City Hall to make sure Boston stays affordable. With that, I'll turn it over to the administration.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards, and it's a pleasure to be here, and I really want to thank the City Council for having this hearing tonight. And I also want to thank the advocates and the general public for coming out. It's a day after, it's after work, and people are here because they really care about the city and they care about affordable housing. And a lot of the comments, we were taking good notes, and those comments are going to be important. And the timing is good too as we look at this policy. Just want to very briefly, and I won't talk for very long, but as many of you know, we've all been working very hard on our affordable housing issues in the city of Boston. We do have a plan to create more housing because we have a housing shortage, but we need to make sure that a lot of that housing is affordable to a range of incomes. Our hope is that at the end of our housing plan that we have created 69,000 new units, and 16,000 of those are affordable. And you add those to the existing affordable housing that we have in the city, the deed-restricted units, we'll have 70,000 units of affordable deed-restricted housing in the city. And I know affordability is debated, so let's say deed-restricted, below market. Right now in the city of Boston, about 20% of our housing stock is deed-restricted and below market, 27% of our rental stock. And I am I'm acutely aware that we don't have enough, that we need to keep going, we need to develop policies that will allow us to build more and have more, but it's a very good percentage given compared to other cities in the United States, and I think we can thank many of the people in the room for that. We also, as we continue to build housing, we need to preserve what we have. I mentioned we have 54,000 deed-restricted units. Many of those, and especially in the last 2 years, have been at risk of losing their affordability, so we've had to put a lot of resources to keeping those units affordable. I'm going to hand this over to my colleague, Tim Davis, who's going to talk about the mechanics of the IDP policy, where the BPDA is in evaluating this very important policy, And then I'm going to talk some about the cash that we are receiving through the policy and how it's being spent. So, Tim, I'm going to turn this over to you and then take it back.
Thank you, Chief Dillon. I'm Tim Davis. I'm the Housing Policy Manager at the Boston Planning and Development Agency. As you know, the Inclusionary Development Policy, or IDP, was first created in 2000. Mayor Walsh made major updates to the program in December 2015, including increases to off-site and payout requirements. The IDP currently applies to any proposed residential project that has 10 or more units, requires zoning relief, is financed by the city or built on property owned by the city, and that includes BPDA-owned parcels. Through this program, developers create income-restricted units with their own private funds, expanding our ability to meet the housing needs of Boston residents. Developers can meet their IDP requirements through one of three ways: through units within the project, scattered throughout the building, through the creation of off-site units near the project, or through a contribution to the IDP fund, which is managed by Sheila Dillon's Office of the Department of Neighborhood Development, and which is combined with other affordable housing resources. Since the inception of the program, over 2,600 on-site and off-site income-restricted units have been completed. These units can be found in almost every neighborhood in the city, but are concentrated where we are seeing the most development, including downtown, the South Boston waterfront, South Boston, and the Fenway. Of these units, 25% are condominiums and 75% are rentals. In addition, there are another 800 units in construction. While less than 10% of IDP and on-site and off-site units are off-site, we have used this part of the program creatively to meet the changing needs of our city. For example, 2 Seaport developers have joined together with South Boston NDC to build 46 units of elderly housing adjacent to the Mary Ellen McCormick development in South Boston. Another Seaport developer is supporting a 55-unit elderly project adjacent to the Ann M. Lynch homes, also in South Boston. We are also using off-site commitments to rebuild 22 units of public housing in East Boston and to secure the long-term tenancies of an affordability of 97 units in the South End and Lower Roxbury. Without this program, all 97 families faced imminent rent increases and eventual displacement. While the IDP has been very successful, it is a policy and is not currently part of zoning. For this reason, we have a home rule petition before you that, if passed by this body and the state legislature, will allow us to incorporate the policy into our zoning code, thus preserving future opportunities to secure commitments from market rate developers to support Boston's housing needs. Even before we enact this legislation, however, we are undergoing a review of the policy, as we promised back in 2015. As part of this review, we are taking a number of steps. Completing a financial feasibility analysis to help us determine how much we can expect to access from market rate developments without stopping development. Meeting with advocates, developers, elected officials, and community groups to get a better understanding of how we can improve the program. Holding a series of public meetings to gather input. And of course, we're thankful for this event also to provide us some input for the policy. And we are maintaining a website at bit.ly/IDP update in order to provide important documentation and to take comment from the general public. Payments by developers are also an important tool for the Department of Neighborhood Development. For more information on that part of the IDP, I'll turn the mic back over to Chief Dillon.
Thank you, Tim. So as Tim mentioned, we are also collecting a lot of funding for affordable housing through the IDP policy, and it's absolutely become a critical resource for our work. Since D&D has taken on the collection and distribution of this funding, $110 million has been collected, and it is anticipated that we'll collect an additional $12 million in 2020. These funds are combined with other affordable housing resources and are used across the city. The money is made available through a competitive request for proposals, and nonprofits and for-profits apply for this funding. Since D&D took over management of the fund, over 2,137 units of affordable housing has been funded with IDP revenue. Recent examples of these projects, we cut ribbons very, very recently, in fact last week, on the Treadmark in Dorchester, where we funded 51 low-income units, and there was also 4 on-site IDP units in the market rate portion of the building. In the Union, located downtown, where 46 units have been completed for people who have experienced homelessness. We are able to reach lower incomes when we use the funding. when we look at the range, and it was in the BPDA's 2018 IDP report, 70% of the units created with the funding are serving households making between $22,000 and $64,000 a year. We're also using IDP for the acquisition opportunity program, where nonprofits are buying existing tenanted buildings and converting them into long-term affordable housing and preserving the tenants. So it's a fabulous program. We would be lost without it right now. We are using the funds well. We are monitoring the units that are created. We are collecting the funds with Treasury. So I really would say this is a very tightly run, very, very good program. We certainly look forward to the public comment to see how we can strengthen it further. Thank you.
Thank you. So to my colleagues, I'm going to allow for each one of us to kind of have questions no more than 5 minutes in one round. And then because it's an evening hearing and I'm cognizant of the fact, I'm hoping we're not going to have multiple rounds, and instead we can invite our second panel up for them to do a presentation and us to go through a round with them as well. Okay. Yep. Then we can get back to more public testimony, which is the goal of having it in the evening. So I'll start with my colleagues first, and I'll conclude if there's any other questions that they haven't asked. So to the co-sponsors, would either of you want to go first?
Thank you, Council Edwards, and thank you to the panelists for being here, and more importantly, thank you for your leadership on helping provide affordable housing in our city. Sheila, I know you mentioned it, but could you talk a little about the city's timeline for finalizing a new IDP? Will it be sufficient for getting input from residents across the city, or what's your time frame like right now?
The process is being run by the BPDA counselor, so I'm going to hand that question over to Tim Davis, if that is okay with you.
Sure.
Thank you, Sheila. We are taking comment periods through the summer. We have not set a specific date for closing that comment period. The financial feasibility analysis is ongoing right now as well. We do hope to be able to make the updates to the policy in the fall.
Thank you, Tim. The current IDP is 13% for projects that have 10 units or more. Is there room to change those parameters? Can we look at increasing IDP to somewhere around maybe 20%, or lowering the threshold for IDP requirements so that developers would say six units would also need to have IDP? What are some of your thoughts about that?
So we're going to see what the financial feasibility analysis brings us before we make any specific commitments as to the percentage. However, we are, and I am very interested in resetting the triggering to a lower unit count. We're looking at how we might implement that with the very smallest projects. There would not be necessarily sufficient number of units to bring us an extra unit, but we certainly are looking at ways that we could get an IDP payment from those projects, and also how we would work with ISD more closely to be able to capture those projects.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you to Sheila. Sheila, I know you worked with us on the row houses in Chinatown. Mm-hmm. Do you have an update on that for us? What is D&D doing, helping our immigrant community, helping our low-wage workers?
So the row houses are located in Chinatown, and D&D's been working with the residents of Chinatown, some of the nonprofits, to build a significant amount of affordable housing in Chinatown. We need to advance that pipeline. We are hoping that multiple projects located in Chinatown come into our funding round this fall. We are pushing the developers to do so because we always want a healthy pipeline of projects in Chinatown, in every neighborhood, but especially Chinatown. We have met with the Chinatown Land Trust, the BPDA, to talk about the row houses. And because their per unit cost is so high, we are looking to try to find an off-site obligation from a downtown developer to see if they can't be acquired by the Chinatown Land Trust, some of them by the Chinatown Land Trust.
Thank you, Sheila, and I appreciate your hard work on this. I had the opportunity to visit for that press conference with Councilor Flaherty and yourself several weeks ago. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you to the mayor's leadership, to CPA, but also to Councilor Flaherty as well. Thank you, Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. Councilor Flaherty?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you provide us with the total number of projects that were found in non-compliance with the IDP, the names of those projects and the names of the owners of those buildings? I know in Council Flynn and I's neighborhood, 135 Athens Street and I think 160 West Broadway were one of those projects, but...
Councilor, I was not prepared today to bring the exact names of those projects and the owners of those projects. However, I can say that one of the things that has been kind of important for us in this administration is to move from an old system that was an access database that barely had all the information we needed in it, and a documentation system that was not in the 21st century either. So the reason we identified some of these projects was actually through our efforts to clean up our books, to clean up and increase our data systems and make them more clear. And we found some very old projects where there's probably no opportunity to get those units. But there was 16 projects we found initially. And there was probably a total of about 36 units between those 16. So these were all very small projects with 2 units each. We have resolved 9 of them now that are either completely in compliance or in the marketing process. We have 6 that are out of compliance, and we have 4 that we consider write-offs because of foreclosures and other situations on the owners. So as we've gone through, that means that we've also just added, because there's always going to be something out of compliance. You'll see those numbers mean we've also added 3 recently that on top of that 16 that are brand new out of compliance. And as part of this, we've also established new workflows to make sure that as soon as a building permit is pulled, we're contacting the owner to make sure that they're reminded that there are obligations, that we have check-ins along the way to make sure that they're in the marketing process, and that we also have, a step 1 letter from compliance, a step 2 letter that includes legal, a step 3 that's from legal that's actually that's a legal action. So we've moved to a process where we are trying to make sure that these don't happen in the future. There will always be developers who will seek to either skirt the rules, but we think that this is really an improvement on our part over the last year.
And if through the chair, if you could get us a list of those, I know you probably didn't have them with you. What were some of the, sort of a random survey, what were some of the penalties that were imposed on the developers, and were those penalties sort of beyond financial fines?
So only one of them have we imposed a penalty on to this date. That was the 135 Athens Street project, and the reason why you saw that project was because we had to go to the board to approve that. The other ones were actually getting the units. Okay. So there's no need to do a financial penalty.
Getting the units? Okay.
We're actually getting the units.
So you kind of caught them in time then?
Yeah.
How are we able to track developers that use LLCs, and is the BPDA open to requiring developers to disclose all of their LLCs when they're doing sort of new business with the city?
I would have to check with other staff in our agency about what their openness was to doing that.
At a recent working session to discuss Mayor Walsh's home rule petition around the linkage and increases to the linkage formula, during that working session, the IDP came up. And at the hearing, we heard that it would be challenging or close to impossible to track projects by developers' sort of portfolio of projects. Can you explain maybe how is that the case?
So a developer may have multiple LLCs working on different projects. Within that LLC, they may have different investors, and in each LLC is also being financed separately, usually by a different lender. And so the lender and their investors are looking at each project and whether or not it is viable. So for us to go after each project is actually better than trying to go after a project after they triggered a certain number. So that's why I think we're more open to lowering the unit trigger than we are to doing a portfolio approach.
And I mean, obviously, we can use a couple models. We have the casino model, if you will, liquor license model, even assumed to probably be the marijuana licenses, where you have to disclose, your background, your investors, what have you. So I'd like to see the BPDA move in that direction to require developers to disclose who their LLCs are and who's behind the curtain, if you will, just for full disclosure and transparency.
Right, thank you.
And obviously, I am a supporter of evaluating the amount of units that trigger the IDP requirement. So I'm hopeful. I speak for myself. I think the body would agree, as long with you guys, that we're open to lowering the amount of units and/or using a sliding scale.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're in a conundrum right now in South Boston where we're talking about when the Broadway has to be rezoned, and there's some discussion about increasing the height of Broadway, which is the last thing the neighborhood wants. The neighborhood feels that it's overdeveloped there, sort of height and density out. We'd rather have a sliding scale where we can accomplish the same goals without allowing people to have to put another floor or two on their building. So again, food for thought on that as well. And finally, if you could provide us with information with respect to the number of units built at each AMI level.
Okay.
Kind of give us a sense of sort of what's happening citywide, how many units built at 70%, how many units built at 100% of AMI. That would be helpful as a citywide council, kind of getting a snapshot as to sort of what are the trends across the city, and what, how many units are being built for each category to help us better assess as to where we need to go.
Councilor, do you want that for all programs or just IDP?
Just the IDP for now.
Okay.
Yeah, thank
Very
you.
good.
Appreciate that, and thank you, Tim and Sheila, for your time and attention.
Okay,
I know
we can provide that
how hard you
information.
guys work. We've been at a number of different hearings recently, and it's an important issue. I know you guys take it very seriously, and for full disclosure, I'm at an event the other day, and Chief Dillon called me. It was a Sunday, and he called me from a 635 number, so working on a Sunday afternoon while I'm running around citywide. But so I appreciate your attention to detail, and that this is a 24/7 for both of you, as it is for everyone in the gallery here. So thank you, Madam Chair.
So, Councilor, the percentage of units by each AMI is available in the 2018 report.
Great.
The numbers are also available on the IDP update website under any of the presentations that we're using in neighborhoods now. But we can certainly send that to you, but I wanted the public to know that it's also publicly available.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Councilor Janey.
I want to thank the makers once again for convening this important conversation. Obviously, thank the panel and all the advocates for being here. Just a couple of questions, and I apologize, I will have to slip out. I have another commitment, but very anxious to hear more testimony from the public and the second panel. I'm sorry to miss the second panel, so we'll be looking at the tape. So when you opened up, you talked about what would trigger IDP, and I support my colleagues in their efforts to look at increasing the percentage. I think that's very important. I don't think 13% is enough, so I would certainly support looking at how to increase that, as well as the trigger, looking at a lower trigger. But currently it's 10 units or more, right? And then you gave some other parameters. Doesn't need zoning relief. What were the others?
It needs to have zoning relief, and that's one reason why we'd like to get it into the zoning.
Okay.
And it's either city-financed or on city-owned land. So even if it does not require zoning relief, but it's on city-owned land, then we would ask for something on that project.
Do you have a sense of how many projects over the 10 units were not counted as part of this?
So over a number of years, 95% of projects with 10 or more units require zoning relief. Over the last year, our agency has only approved one. Our agency looks at the projects that are 15 units or over in terms of our development review. There's only been one that was zoning compliant that we approved, although there are two more that are in the pipeline right now out of the numerous projects that we approve in a given year.
Mm-hmm. And you're collecting public comment in terms of making recommendations. Where are you now in terms of your recommendations? Are there a couple of things that you know will come out of this process already? Like these ideas around increasing the percentage or lowering the trigger?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, we're certainly looking to increase the percentage. We're waiting on the feasibility study to give us some more answers to that.
And when will that be done? Just the timeline?
Probably over the next month or so. Okay, we also have a technical advisory committee that we formed that includes advocates and developers, both, to kind of help us review both how that model looks like and then also the results. And we're having the first meeting of that technical advisory committee this Friday. So we're moving through that process. I think that there is a consensus that we certainly want to look at the triggering in terms of the number of units. We certainly want to make sure that it's in zoning so that we can capture this on all projects going forward. And we certainly are committed to looking at a number of ways that we can meet the needs of households at a more diverse range of incomes that we're doing now.
So is there an appetite to also, many of the folks who testified earlier talked about the AMI and looking at the threshold that we currently use. not being adequate or not being the one that we should use here because the incomes here are much lower than some of the surrounding towns. Is that also on the table?
Well, I think part of the review is looking at, as Tim said earlier, how much we can stress market rate developments. And so can we get additional units, and should we keep the AMIs where they are? So I think all of that is on the table, Councillor. There is, some people that believe that the incomes that we're using now are serving populations that aren't able to access our more affordable development programs. So I think we just need to listen to all comment and then see where the comments take us.
Right, and I think it is important to make sure that there is something in place for those who don't qualify for some of the deed restricted, but also making sure we've got the right housing for the different range of incomes that we have here, and many of whom cannot still afford the market rate.
True.
And so it is important that we do that. In terms of on-site versus off-site, is that also in the 2018 report? Like, where can we find that information about which projects have the on-site versus on-site?
We don't have a lot about that in the 2018 report, but I think in the data that we'll be bringing out as part of the update, we'll talk more about that. Right now, only 7% of the on-site and off-site units that have been completed so far are actually off-site. It's a fairly small number. It's about 160, 180 units, I think, is the total that were created that have been completed off-site. We do have a number of units that are in our pipeline, including like the 2 elderly projects make a big bulk of that I referred to earlier. So there's a fairly healthy pipeline of off-sites. I think for us, we want to look at the balance of on-site versus off-site, but also the balance between on-site and payouts to the fund. Because the fund obviously can do more for lower income households, can meet the needs in neighborhoods where we don't have as much development going on. So that's part of our discussion, as well as what is the balance we want to strike in terms of contribution versus on-site. Under the 2015 policy revision, we actually have fewer developers paying into the fund than we did. So there's more of them are on site right now than we did in the previous policy.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Madam
you.
Chair.
I'm going to do some quick questions and then, or actually no, Councilor Frey had one quick question.
Follow up on Councilor
And then I'm
Jane
gonna-
When you had mentioned, Tim, earlier, off-site near the project, is it would have to be a mile, a mile? Can South Boston waterfront money go to Hyde Park, for example? Can Roxbury money go to Alston Brighton?
Well, I can speak to the off-sites. Under our current policy, we're encouraging developers to do them within 1/2 mile of the project. Under the of the completed off-site units, I said that 7% of let's see, I think it's 60%. I'd have to do the math, but 60% of the off-site units now are in the same neighborhood as the original project. It's a little bit lower for the ones that are in the pipeline, but that's because we have 120 units that are coming from the South Boston waterfront that are going to South Boston. So they're not going far away from the neighborhood. And we have 62 units going from Back Bay to the South End for the preservation of Newcastle Saranac. So but that's actually a 1/2 mile from the project, but it's just in a different neighborhood.
And that's, I think, one of the problems we have with the South Boston waterfront, where we've got a big bang for the buck with the off-site, but we now have, a neighborhood in a district down there that is not diverse. There's no elderly. It's a big conundrum for us. So now we're trying to sort of maybe reinvent the wheel to create that opportunity down there. But so again, it was a double-edged sword. We were able to do 24 units here, 30 units here, 40 units here. Put a lot of people in homes. But if you look at the demographic down along the South Boston waterfront, I don't think it's what folks envisioned happening down there. So
It is a very complicated problem, and there's pros and cons to all of it. So love your thinking as we develop this policy.
Just to not echo too much of what's already been said, I completely agree with, I think, one of the folks who testified that we need to go bold. We need to be big about this and see it as one of the few tools that we have in the toolbox where government is doing its job to counter the market forces and to make sure that we're really at the table to drive them. And so I'm glad that the percentage is on the table. I'm glad that, I hope that the AMI and really assessing whether that measuring stick has outlived its use I hope that that's on the table. And because again, it's about reflecting the needs of the folks in Boston. I'm happy to hear that you are looking at different triggering points for the units, and it's necessary. I think 100% absolutely Boston controlling its own zoning versus having to go to the State House is vital to this, for us being able to be nimble and being able to adjust and move going forward. And I didn't hear too much about whether the square footage of IDP, that is on the table, I understand, not just looking at the number of units, but also looking at the IDP percentage of square foot in a building. Am I correct?
Right. So right now, for on-site units, we look at the 13% of the units. But because we also have a policy that the units need to be comparable.
Right.
So effectively in implementation, that's what we also do. We do also look at square footage, but it's not a clear part up front of the policy. But I am looking at ways in which we might use square footage more prominently, so that, for example, we have a project that has very large units. We may be able to get more units by allowing the developer to do more smaller units. I don't mean small, like when I say large, I mean they're doing like basically a house within a building, like a luxury building. And if they've got a 2,000 square foot unit, we can do a 1,000 square foot unit. We can do 2 of those. So there's a question about changing how we look at things a little bit so that we have more flexibility to maybe ask for more 3-bedroom units instead of just looking at unit counts. We do look at square footage very closely when it comes to the off-site units, because that's our way of making sure that we're getting something comparable outside the building.
Okay. And so in terms of other things that I think are necessary to go bold, have you considered, or will you consider, IDP funds or IDP offsite units being put on neighborhood housing trusts, or land trusts, excuse me, so that there's an automatic partnership that you're driving between a neighborhood land trust and, say, a developer who wants to build their affordable units offsite?
So I'll speak for the funding. We welcome putting money into projects that are built on land trusts. I mean, we have done that historically with DSNI.
Right.
Would love opportunities to work with the Chinatown Land Trust, so we would welcome that. We like land trusts. We believe in them, so it's an opportunity we'd like to see more of.
So maybe that would be added to the list of how and where IDP units could be located. You had mentioned that you're waiting on the report. Who is the consultant?
It's Landwise. It's a Watertown-based company that does economic and financial feasibility.
Is there is the contract from the city with them, is that publicly available? Will that be publicly available?
I can provide it to you, yes.
Okay. And in terms of, I think one of the questions I have had is when people, I don't know if you track this, when people are rejected for the affordable units, you know, my concern is that they're being rejected for credit issues, having bad credit, for prior evictions, and how do we make sure that we aren't screening out folks who need that second chance? Do we track rejections right now?
I would have to say the answer would be no, our agency does not. What we get is after the property manager or the marketing agent has already determined whether someone they think is eligible for the project, they send us the documentation to review the eligibility. And the income and asset eligibility or, you know, other features. So we're not looking at that specific data. Now we are very concerned about the issue, however.
Right.
And we have been working with Fair Housing. They have some new policies they've been putting into the fair marketing process that require that marketing agencies take into account CORI records, credit records, and eviction records in a more kind of holistic way, so they don't just turn someone away for that kind of record. I think there's more that we can do on that, and that's kind of part of our continuous improvement, is to look at ways that we can make sure that those barriers are reduced. But in terms of having like good data on that, I would have to say we don't have that at this time.
I think that that's something that we should consider as part of tracking going forward. And I would just favor, I don't think that the credit score should be actually considered as part of a person's eligibility. So once we have their income, once you have certain, you know, good housing data, I just want to make sure that we're not screening people out for prior mistakes or not paying their.
I was talking to our marketing folks today because I saw that question and I want to know more about it. And they said some of the best tenants are foregoing paying other bills on time so they can pay their rent. So
hence their credit going down.
We do give guidance around Corey, and we give guidance around how marketing agents should look at credit. But I agree with Tim. I think we can expand on this work.
Thank you. So I'll keep within my own 5-minute rule, and I'm going to invite up I invite you to stay if you'd like, and for the second panel to join us at the table. That includes Karen Chen and Pei Ying Mu from the Chinese Progressive Association, Chinatown Resident Association, Carolyn Chow from the Asian American Resource Workshop, and Dorchester Not for Sale and the IDP Coalition, Cortina Van from Massachusetts Affordable Housing Alliance, and Jason DeRosier from the Alston Brighton CDC, Alston Brighton Coalition, and IDP Coalition. You were free to sit actually at the table too if you wanted to have the conversation. Okay. That's fine. It's up to you. Just want to make sure you were welcome. You were welcome to stay. That's it. Okay. All right. So what we'll probably do is have each one of you speak for no more than 3 minutes each, just in presentation, and then we'll go and have we'll have questions for you as counselors, and to make sure that we're engaged in that, and then we're going to go back to public testimony. Okay. So we can start at this end. Are we having interpretive services? Yeah. So we'll increase the time.
我係余佩晶，我就係前進會嘅會員。我原來呢係住喺唐人街黑順街103號嘅2樓嘅住客。
My name is Pei Ying Yu. I'm a member of the Chinese Progressive Association. I used to live at 103 Hudson Street in Chinatown with my sister.
咁啊，我喺黑順街住嗰15年嗰時，我係被到逼遷。 因為嗰個新嘅賣主，佢係用可唔人道嘅手段呢嚟逼遷嘅，佢就係首先搬咗我哋嘅爐頭，拉細啲電線，咁啊拆細啲牆，咁佢同我哋講呢話係向你裝修，咁我信以為真啦，以為我哋裝修，其實佢就叫電力公司啊，咁啊嚟睇話我哋唔合格，叫我哋搬走。 佢係用呢啲手段嚟叫我哋搬走嘅，咁啊我哋搬走係101、103，但係總共有15個家庭被逼搬走。咁啊我今日好高興喺呢度呢，有機會喺呢度同大家講下呢，即係話近於嗰個 IDP， 咁我好希望喺呢度能夠改變呢個 IPT 嘅問題。
So in 2015, I was a victim of displacement. Basically, the owner, First Suffolk LLC, bought 103 Hudson Street and used very inhumane ways to evict us, including taking away a stove so we can't cook dinner, and then pull all the wires in the building, and then punch holes in the wall and saying that in the name of the need for repair, but really just want us to move out of the building. And I'm really happy to share my experience, also hope that it will inform how do we think about the inclusionary development policy.
因為點解要改變呢個 IDP 呢？係因為你建10層以上嘅先係可俾到低收入嘅人， 咁如果你10層以下嘅就係冇呢個負擔，咁變咗建築商係有呢個控制可乘。咁我買落來，咁我可以分兩棟嚟起，咁我起10層以下，咁佢可以唔使負擔，唔使俾嗰個負擔性嘅房屋。咁我覺得呢個有改善。喺起6層以上嘅，又俾個百分比出嚟，可負擔性嘅房屋。
So that's what happened to 103 and 111 Hudson. The owner turned it into a 10 unit. So he had no obligation for affordable housing. So when we limiting, only 10 units required to provide affordable housing, it's a loophole for developers. They can do, like my landlord, I think he should pay, my previous landlord should have contributed to affordable housing, but he didn't have to under the current policy. Or if a developer decides to, buy some row houses in Chinatown, instead of building, having one development, you can separate it so that to avoid having any sort of affordable housing. So, to me, it's a loophole. And I think that for units that are, for buildings in 6 units, the affordable units should be proportionate to the market rate units that being developed.
好似現成嘅唐人街個康樂樓咧，咁你收入有15,000蚊啦，你都唔可以去嗰度申請，都俾佢拒絕咗。咁你中收入、低收入嘅根本就冇可能喺度申請咗房屋。
So people talk about the affordability standard. We think that Hong Kong House is one of the good developments in Chinatown, but yet people who make $15,000 or less, which is a lot of, elderly-ish population, their application actually get rejected.
咁你最近嘅發展嚟講呢，好似政府而家提出嗰個ITP 嘅改善嘅話，呢講唐街而家有可大嘅改變，但係都未滿足低收入嘅需求。
So we have been seeing a lot of changes under the current administration in Chinatown. Those are positive, but yet there's still a need for a lot more affordable housing.
咁就喺呢度希望同埋期待，咁能夠得到市議員嘅同意，我哋去改變呢個 IDP 嘅政策，咁喺低下層嘅，即係話10層以下嘅，都有俾出嗰個低收入嘅百分比出嚟。
So I hope that, the councilors are listening to the community carefully and really crafting a policy that actually truly help the community. 仲有
咁嗰個 ITP 嗰個興建呢，咁應該就因地制宜。咁你喺唐人街建，咁你又按照唐人街嗰個收入，咁你個百分比，咁你啲低中下層嘅人先能夠住得到。
So for a neighborhood like Chinatown, it's important to keep residents, to use this program as a way to help residents who are displaced, because people live in Chinatown. There's so much social network to help people in their daily lives. Without that, it would be very hard.
咁就即係話起個房屋呢，我哋要考慮到即係中下層嘅階層嘅人嘅收入。咁如果你想穩定華埠、穩定到華省嘅話啦，咁你中下層都冇屋住，咁你點去穩定呢個社區啊？真係好希望改變呢個 ITP 呢個計劃。我講係咁。
So I hope that the IDP program is a program that, not just look at developers, but really thinking about how do we help the community, the most vulnerable population in a community. And often when we talk about progress in society, is measured on how well the vulnerable people are doing. So I hope that, this program will help address those issues.
Thank you.
多謝大家。
Thank you.
Thank you. Jason.
Good evening. My name is Jason DeRozier, and I'm the Manager of Community Building and Engagement at Alston-Brighton CDC. Thank you, Chairperson Edwards and members of the committee, for the opportunity to testify today regarding docket number 0144, order for a hearing to discuss the inclusionary development policy and affordable housing and speak to the urgent need for a stronger inclusionary development policy. For the past 38 years, Allston-Brighton CDC has been dedicated to opening doors for Allston-Brighton residents. Our various program areas strive to make the neighborhood a thriving community and to create opportunities for individuals and families to achieve their own piece of the American dream. Over the years, Allston-Brighton CDC has developed a portfolio of 506 affordable housing units, opening doors to Allston-Brighton so that the community remains to be a stable, equitable, and healthy neighborhood of choice for all residents who wish to stay and establish roots. Recently, we have found doors closing on neighborhood residents. Graduates of our first-time homebuyers program can no longer afford to purchase in the neighborhood, with even condominiums beyond the reach of many residents. Waiting lists for subsidized housing in the neighborhood are growing, and we have witnessed the shrinkage of the subsidized housing stock over the past 2 years. Our housing development efforts have been stymied by exorbitant acquisition costs, as new construction costs on average $500,000 per unit in a Boston multifamily project. However, the high cost of housing development has not impacted everyone the same. In recent years, the neighborhoods of Allston and Brighton have become the new hot neighborhoods for development, with more than 4,800 units of private development in the pipeline. It's more important than ever to bring resources to bear to ensure that new development builds upon the rich cultural history of our neighborhoods and provides a spectrum of housing opportunities for current residents as well as new residents who wish to establish roots and not continue the wave of displacement and gentrification currently impacting many low to moderate income residents and communities of color across the city, including Allston-Brighton. Boston is a city of neighborhoods. We are a strong city because we have strong neighborhoods. Whether we live or work in the city, we are Bostonians, and as Bostonians, we believe in the mantra, "It takes a village," to ensure that every resident is given the opportunity to reside in and flourish in our communities. Housing development is not unwelcomed in our city, but developers must come to the table ready to work with residents on what kind of housing is ultimately developed to be a part of our village and add to the vibrancy and vitality of our city. But this is not happening. As previously mentioned, Allston-Brighton currently has 4,803 housing units proposed in the pipeline, with most of these units being out of reach for residents. Brighton's median income is $56,729, and Allston's is $42,722. Given the high cost of rental housing in the neighborhood, increasing numbers of low to moderate income, working and middle class residents have been forced to leave the neighborhood. 80% of Allston-Brighton residents are renters, and in recent years, rents in the neighborhoods have increased sharply. Average rents for family-sized units, i.e. 3 bedrooms, have increased by 30% over the last 2 years, from $21.31 to $27.67 per month, respectively. Rents for units of all sizes have increased by 32% on average or more. Rent in Allston-Brighton for a 3-bedroom household would require a family earning $52,795, the median household income for the neighborhood, to pay 63% of its monthly income on rent. Rent for a 1-bedroom exceeds the entire gross pay of a full-time worker earning the minimum wage, $21,120 a year earned, $21,612 for rent only. Although new construction is occurring in Allston-Brighton and across the city, affordable homes for current residents are not keeping pace. Projections based on the 2016 U.S. American Community Survey data report indicate that there are approximately 8,400 households in Allston-Brighton today earning less than 50% of the neighborhood median income. Virtually all of these households will be eligible for subsidized housing were the units available. The need for affordable housing in Allston-Brighton far exceeds the supply, as applicants on waiting lists generally wait 5 or more years before getting a unit. Allston-Brighton CDC has a wait list of 5 to 7 years on average. Although tenant-based subsidies are available for some low-income residents, today's rents are so high that even families with rental vouchers or certificates may have difficulty finding affordable housing in Allston-Brighton and Boston more broadly. Allston-Brighton CDC would like to thank Mayor Walsh, the Department of Neighborhood Development, and the Boston Planning and Development Agency for working with affordable housing advocates in the process of updating the IDP. The Allston-Brighton CDC is a member of the IDP Coalition, and as such supports the IDP Coalition's recommendations for strengthening the IDP, which includes considering AMIs below the current 70% AMI standard for IDP units. Allston-Brighton CDC is pleased to see the city considering deeper affordability standards with JP Rocks and Plan Glover's Corner, We would like to see the same standard applied to IDP more broadly. Given that these definitions are based on income levels in Greater Boston, including more affluent suburbs in the region, we recommend the AEMI targets for IDP units be lowered so they are more aligned with incomes of Boston residents, and that levers such as income tiering are used to provide a greater spectrum of affordability in new development. Thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of a stronger IDP. We stand ready to work with the council, the mayor's office, D&D, and BPDA to move this forward.
Thank you.
Thank you to Councilor Edwards, Councilor Flaherty, and Councilor Flynn for your leadership on this issue. And thank you for having this in the evening and for having interpretation, which is something we often are not able to access even in our own neighborhood. My name is Carolyn Chu. I'm the Executive Director of the Asian American Resource Workshop. I'm an organizer with Dorchester Not for Sale and a member of the IDP Coalition. Through my work with Dorchester Not for Sale, a multiracial, multi-generational, multilingual group of residents who are concerned with what kind of development comes to our neighborhood, affordable housing, good jobs, real community process, and the displacement crisis, I have seen the harm and displacement that happens when new development does not meet the needs and incomes of residents who live in the neighborhood. As a resident of the St. Mark's section of Dorchester and an organizer in Fields Corner, I see how speculation rips through our communities and how even the idea of new market rate development impacts families and housing in the surrounding area and the speculation we see because of that. Dorchester Not for Sale has been organizing for the past 2 years to make sure those most impacted by displacement are heard in the redevelopment process and that working class residents' needs are being centered in decision making. We know IDP is a critical piece of the puzzle, and this is an issue of equity. In our multiracial working class neighborhood, 53% of residents make under $50,000 a year, and 32% make under $25,000 a year. All of these residents are at risk of displacement as new development comes in, and the current IDP units do not address their needs. This is why we support increasing the IDP and prioritizing units at lower income levels. As discussed, throughout today, right, over 50% of residents in our neighborhood make under $50,000 a year, and the 70% AMI threshold is around $80,000 for a family of 4. So the IDP Coalition, through a collective process, has identified the following as our recommendations for the city IDP process to make sure that new private development does not continue to push out our people. Our city has a displacement crisis, and we need to make sure that new development is part of the solution, not the problem. Our recommendations are as followed as the IDP Coalition. 33% set aside. Private developers should set aside 33% of units as affordable. And of those, there should be a range of 30 to 70% AMI units with an average of 40% to really address the needs of folks making lower incomes, as many folks in our neighborhoods do. And for ownership units, which Cortina will speak more about, we are recommending 50% to 100% AMI, and it's really important to us that folks with lower incomes are able to access home ownership opportunities, as we know that's a critical part of stable neighborhoods. And permanent affordability of units and decreasing the 10-unit threshold, as Puying talked about, and we're grateful to have her on the panel as someone who's seen the worst of this crisis. And so, yeah, I want to particularly highlight the need to have more units at lower income levels. Most residents in our neighborhood and neighborhoods like Chinatown cannot access the current income restricted units, and we need truly affordable units to stabilize our communities. IDP can be a powerful tool against displacement as new development comes in, and we need to make sure that we are using this tool to keep our folks here in the neighborhoods of our city. And we want to just also make sure, we're really encouraged about the home rule petition, and we look forward to the council continuing to play a leadership role as that moves forward. Thank you.
Chairwoman Edwards, Councilor Flaherty, Councilor Flynn, and members of the committee, want to thank you for the opportunity to testify on this important inclusionary development policy. My name is Cortina Van, and I'm a resident of Dorchester. I am here on behalf of Massachusetts Affordable Housing Alliance, MAHA, which is partner in the IDP Coalition. MAHA welcomes the opportunity to engage with the council, the mayor, the Boston State House delegation, community organizations, and other stakeholders to build a broad-based campaign to update and strengthen our inclusionary development requirements and to make sure that these requirements are incorporated in the zoning code. MAHA's mission is to educate and to mobilize individuals and communities to break down barriers to sustainable, affordable homeownership and increase the affordable homeownership opportunities. Through education, civic engagement, we are committed to reducing the racial homeownership gap in Boston throughout the state. Right now, the racial divide is stark. 44% of white households in Boston own their own home. That figure is 29% for Black households, 26% for Asian households, and just 16% for Latinos. The means our households of color are not able to stabilize our housing and build assets the same way that many of our white neighbors are doing. It also means we're being disproportionately impacted by every increasing rents because building sales, increasing rents where the new owners want the buildings delivered vacant and other housing crises that result in homelessness and displacement. With the housing situation in Boston is especially dire for Black, Latino, and Asian neighbors. We know that home prices in the city are well beyond the reach of a very large fraction of all working families, as well as young professionals that our employees need to recruit and retain. This is a social and racial justice issue. In this greater Boston region, we are attracting lots of jobs, but we don't have anywhere near enough housing that low, moderate, and middle-income workers who might take those jobs can afford. And one of the things I want to do on our efforts for our housing with residents, we have further been hampered by the federal government's withdrawal from its historic role in funding affordable housing, construction, and lack of state funding for homeownership housing. MAHA will continue to partner with the city and others to advocate for additional state and federal funding, particularly for homeownership programs. We have worked hard to increase state funding through the Community Preservation Trust Fund and measures that would significantly expand the Housing Trust Fund. As we work at the state and federal levels, we must also make sure there are strong local policies and increase local funding for homes that our home buyers can afford. Maximizing the number of affordable units and the level of affordability required of our market rate housing developers is a critical tool for producing the housing we so desperately need. MAHA expects to graduate over 1,300 people from our home buying classes this year. That means every month we're adding many prospective first-time home buyers to the Boston housing market where there's almost nothing they can afford. Most of our graduates have to win a homeownership lottery, trying to hang on in our stressful, expensive, and uncertain rental market or move far away from the city. In many cases, our buyers have good jobs, have great credit, but they still don't qualify for market rate or even for affordable homeownership lotteries. They need additional subsidies to bring the price of the lottery properties down to a level they can afford. We believe that households with incomes of $45,000 to $70,000 deserve a chance to sink roots in Boston, and we are working with D&D to make this possible. Additional IDP units, deeper affordability, and more IDP cash payments are needed to help these individuals and families. MAHA strongly supports Boston's home rule petition that would offer our inclusionary development policy into the zoning code so that it would be applied to as-of-right development. As the city continues to rezone for greater density, it's important that IDP requirements apply to all housing developments with a number of proposed units is above a threshold laid out in the policy. We are working to simultaneously get the IDP linkage home rule petition through the State House and engage the BDPA, D&D, and stakeholders in an assessment of areas where the policy can require more of developers while engaging them to make a reasonable profit on their buildings. We appreciate the Walsh administration and the BDPA holding listening sessions, as has been mentioned before, with housing organizations, with the developers, with job training providers to gather input on the parameters of the two different feasibility studies that are now in process, one on linkage and the other on IDP. We eagerly await the results of these studies. We believe that the real estate market has changed since 2015, when the IDP policy was last updated. that most affordable units and deeper affordability will be possible in many areas of the city. MAHA will continue to press for responsible increase in both IDP and linkage. Billions of dollars of development is happening throughout Boston. Developers are making millions, but our home buyers cannot find a modest home they can afford. We agree with the mayor in the council that we should not be losing our people in the midst of a tremendous building boom. As we continue to engage developers, we need to incorporate greater affordable requirements and land values in the city of Boston. We're seeing tremendous profits being made by long-term large property owners who are poised to cash in as areas are rezoned, and by new investors who are speculating on land in Dorchester. We need to capture some of the value being created, anticipating rezoning for dense residential and high-value commercial development to benefit our residents. We're being harmed by the overheated market. It is important that we move as quickly as possible to reset the equation that developers encounter as they contemplate new projects. We have to think bigger in our efforts to stem displacement and preserve a place for all people of all races and incomes in Boston. We commend Councilor Edwards, Flaherty, and Flynn for calling for this hearing, and we thank all the councilors for their interest in making sure that the development works for residents. Thank you once again for the opportunity to submit this testimony. Appreciate your help.
Thank you. So I just wanted to first congratulate the entire panel and the advocates here today, because and just also to thank you. You have put a lot of work into the reports, into the communication, into working with the administration. And I think that's that kind of collaboration that really it's to me, it's encouraging. I want people to understand, you know, we didn't get here by accident. There is no magic, you know, something that we can't control or can't be a part of to help drive a solution, and to see you dedicate literally your lives, you know, beyond the 9 to 5 to making sure that we have neighborhoods at the end of the day after this boom. I just want to thank you all for your time. I also wanted to, I have some questions, and so do I'm sure some of my colleagues. And if you wanted to respond to any of the testimony that you had heard before, you should also feel free to do that. I'm going to try and have this back and forth in 15 minutes and really get back to the community to allow for them to finish the testimony. So I don't want you to feel rushed, but I do want to get back to folks who have public testimony, and I'll call them out, and then if you can stay, that's fine, and stay sitting there. So I'll go to first my colleague, Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Edwards, and I want to say thank you to the panelists for the important work that you're doing for the residents of our city. Carolyn, one point that you made that I thought was the most important point all night is you highlighted the translators that are here, and people in the audience that understand Cantonese or Mandarin or Spanish. It's critical that we continue to provide translators for them. But I also think about the affirmative marketing to making sure that our residents in public housing or our residents that may not speak English have access to these applications, know exactly how to fill out an application, that there's technical assistance for them as well. They know where to pick the application up. They know where to drop it off. They may not be experts in the computer, but there should be some technical assistance. I'm just wondering if anyone can highlight some of the affirmative outreach on issues that impact our immigrant community, many people that may not speak English.
So I think that since there's been a housing crisis, I think that people actually mostly come to CPA because they're faced with eviction. I think along with talking to them about kind of like, well, how we can help them to find a home or even find legal representation, I think we also talk about the importance of actually making sure that we're also voicing the fact that we need affordable housing. So I think that in Chinatown, I think the outreach program to the Chinese community has been sufficient. For one Greenway, I remember that when there was 91 unit affordable housing, I think there was more than 10,000 applications was passed out, and I think 5,000 was submitted for 91 units. I think more of the needs around kind of like, well, looking at the population, and then I think some people also too, I think Puyin kind of alluded to it, like Honglock House, and even some of the most recent, we think that a good development in the community, even at 50% area median income, some people's application gets rejected because they don't meet the minimum threshold for tax credit units or the tax credit subsidy. And so we see that as more of a problem. I think usually when we flagged it, we would contact Sheila or other, or if we know who the developer is, and making sure that they have someone bilingual helping be out. But I think still right now, the brunt of it still is on the community. Like whenever there's a lottery, CPA, anything in Chinatown, we probably have to do like 3 or 4 sessions to help residents to fill out forms in a group. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Karen.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think that's, what you're saying is really important, right? There's the policies, and then there's how we implement them and making sure we're implementing in an equitable way. And in a multiracial, multilingual community like, we know Dorchester, to be really being intentional about supporting and resourcing community groups to do that work, and talking about which languages and which pockets make sense, I think will be important as we move forward.
And so the the only other thing I wanted to mention, and which was highlighted earlier, is in regards to the home ownership factor, and that what we've been seeing as an organization and over the 27 years or so, and what we're seeing right now is that a lot of folks who are taking the workshops, a good majority of those folks, when we're talking about people under like 50,000, that 50% of AMI is important, because when folks are right now trying to purchase, you're looking at requirements or policy that's stating 70% of AMI, and folks cannot afford that and need additional subsidy. And you're talking about closing a racial homeownership gap in servicing and having equity. We don't want those folks to be left out. And then you look at, over the years, us advocating for a program that's been successful not only here in Boston, but throughout the state. We see people in those income ranges being successful, staying in their homes and maintaining and being sustainable. So it is possible. The focus is to make sure they're included, not excluded from the policy, and it should really be considered. And also looking at other substantial data, considering the different aspects of affordability, assets, credit scores. Those folks are doing well. So we should be reflecting that and looking at that so that people get access and they're not restricted.
Yeah, and then lastly, in Alston-Brighton, so we, as a CDC, are lucky to have the capacity and ability to kind of take a look at these issues and really work with we have resident services, we have community engagement staff, and then first-time homebuyers staff who can kind of we get the Metro list, we kind of read through it for any home ownership opportunity or rental lottery that might be available that might meet the needs of our residents as well as anyone in the broader community. We're able to, at least in-house and staff, communicate via Spanish and Haitian Creole, and through relationships we have in the community. There's Mandarin, Cantonese, Portuguese, and Russian capabilities as well. So we can kind of coordinate these issues or market these units on a much broader level, and it's great that we get the lottery information from D&D and the BPDA. I read every single PNF for Alston-Brighton. That's enough to keep me busy, so at least when units do come on, I know what developments are being built where, so I know what to pay attention to, so when construction permits are issued, I know where to look to also kind of keep an eye out on those lotteries. But that's also a major capacity crunch, and we're all working on many different things. We're a small CDC. We have a staff of 10. 8 of them are new within the past year. So we experienced a bit of a transition over the last year. So since I've been kind of entrenched in the IDP over the last 5 years, since I've been at the CDC, really trying to make time to also work with other staff members at the organization to make sure they know what's going on with IDP as well. Yeah. So that's a long way of saying that we're trying to put in policies and mechanisms in place so when that lotteries do become available, it's not just on the city to market those, that those of us who understand the neighborhoods, are entrenched in the neighborhoods can help share that information as well.
Thank you.
Councilor Flaherty.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to take the opportunity to thank folks, obviously, for sharing, having the courage to share your story along with Karen, coming in to interpret for you, and obviously appreciate your personal story. And also Council Flynn talks to me about the issues impacting Chinatown along with my colleagues every day. So we're going to continue to work with you guys and the Chinese Progressive Association, and also for Jason and for Carolyn and for Katina for the work that you guys do on a day-to-day basis, your advocacy, but whether it's through the CDC work, whether it's through the Mahar, or whether it's through your Dorchester Not for Sale, the Asian American Resource Workshop, it's all very valuable. It's a partnership here with obviously the City Council and for the folks that we're all trying to help out there, which is we have a good news, bad news story going on in the city. The good news is that Boston is a very attractive place for people to live and for companies to come here. We boast the best colleges, universities, and hospital and network of community health centers in the world. Problem is that the people that made it the great city are having a very hard time being able to afford to live here, and we have to continue to roll up our sleeves, work with our mayor, work with Sheila Dillon at D&D and folks up at the BPDA, along with people that are in here and others, to try to continue to make an impact and try to get as much affordable housing out of projects that are happening in the city. So we're again experiencing unprecedented development and growth in our city, putting a lot of pressure on a lot of people. And so you have my full support. We'll continue to work with the chair here, Chair of Housing, and also my colleague, Council Flynn, and my other colleagues as well, to try to continue to make a difference every day in the lives of people that are struggling to afford to stay in Boston. So, and thank you. And through the chair, I know I was running a little late. I have a 8 o'clock wake I have to make before it closes, but I'll stay for a little bit. I know we have some additional public testimony, but I appreciate all the efforts. Thank you. Very good.
我頭先講嗰個 IDP 呢，我話點解又會即係一定要改善啲嘅 IDP 呢？因為好似我哋咁101同103，咁啊兩個單元都搬咗出去嘅話，咁啊成15戶人，15戶人如果佢而家係建8層以下嘅，咁佢即係我哋15戶人都冇一個有機會翻嚟呢度住。如果你話10層以下嘅都有提供呢個可負擔性嘅房屋嘅話呢，咁我15戶人嘅話，咁我起碼都有好多戶可以搬翻嚟呢度住。
So I want to add, I have just one more comment to add that, in that example of 101 and 103 Hudson Street, so there was actually, even though it was 8 units, but 15 family was displaced. So I think that it's really important that, the requirement is proportionate, because if it's proportionate, let's say that 8 units is market rate, the two can actually bring back some of the residents who was displaced, because some people are still kind of not having stable housing. They still haven't found suitable permanent housing. So that's why it's important for us to make sure to look at that. How do we get the developers to do their fair share?
Thank you. 咁問一樣嘢呢，就係你好似我哋15戶人搬走，咁我雖然係住咗老人屋，住到南端嗰度，但係有啲係帶咗啲細佬哥出去被逼搬咗出去。咁如果佢8層以下嘅都可以有負擔性嘅房屋嘅話，咁咪優先呢啲被逼搬出去嘅人優先抽籤翻嚟呢度住，咁啊可以鞏固下唐人街同埋穩定下社區。
So also too, like for me, I was able to get elderly housing. The waiting list is a lot shorter, but if you're a family, the waiting list is a lot longer. So, we should prioritize, like families, but also people who, the neighborhood that they displaced from, they should have priority.
Thank you.
Neighborhood preference, yeah.
And this doesn't need to continue right now, but I do think what is very necessary for a lot of folks who are in the policy-making positions is examples. You talk about the 1/3, it's the 33%, the 1/3, the 1/3, the 1/3, to not just talk about percentages, but talk about communities that have thrived and maintain their affordability and their desirability for developers, maintaining those high levels. Because again, what we hear from folks in the development community, not all of them, but many, is once you go beyond X percentage, we stop, we can't, we won't. And it's really important for advocates to bring real life examples of where this is working. The other thing is we get examples of cities that are building their way out of it. They'll point to Tokyo, they'll point to all these different examples. And what's really important is that you also present examples, and your testimony was excellent, but for us, and I think also in working with the city, saying, this works here. We're not just coming up with this kind of stuff. We're just not saying your math isn't good and just adding to it. We're actually showing you real life examples. So I would, if you want to supplement your testimony or come back with that, I would appreciate that. But I see folks are still here, and I do want to get to the public testimony. Let me call them up, and then you could respond to me. So I have Karen Strom, Kenzie Bach, Amanda Govan, and Marlon Martin. For those in the audience, that's it that I have. So if you signed up for public testimony, okay. I have 3 additional names: Renee H., Minzong Chu, and Zahira Truth. Those are the names that I have. So did you sign up? Okay, all right. So for right now, I'm going to have them answer the question, but I wanted folks to know I see them and that you're coming up. So please briefly answer the question about examples, and we'll go right to public testimony.
I know from the earlier testimony that that report from the Boston Tenant Coalition will send, and particularly, as we know locally, Cambridge and Somerville have increased their IDP, and New York, San Francisco, and Toronto all have significantly increased. So those are some examples we're looking at, but that full report will be sent by Boston Tenant Coalition.
Excellent.
That by experience, I know that Cambridge actually, the home ownership program, there's some at 60% AMI, whereas most in Boston are around 80 AMI. I think that sometimes the arguments around, whether or not someone can get a mortgage, but, somehow they are, in my building where I live, there are residents at 60%, bought at who was in the 60% AMI. Range, and we're able to get money. And at that time in 2008, lending was probably harder as well. So.
And as far as other examples, the One Mortgage Program, which is a statewide program, so we have had people be successful in that 50% of area median income over the years of the program. And I myself wouldn't have been able to purchase if it were not for the program and being under that 70% of AMI that we currently have policy-wise. So we do have examples of that we can share.
Thank you. And again, where those examples, those percentages, and the development continues. And I'll look to the report for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please, Ms. Karen Strom.
I had paid my entire 100% of my rent in the marketplace, private market. I paid 100% of my own rent, and I was losing the battle as a working participant. And I was denied fuel assistance because I earned $10 too much. I came down with severe allergies. I have severe allergies as an older adult. I have claustrophobia, and the only place I can live is elderly and disabled because that's comfortable and it includes utilities. But yet, why is it that I should get a doctor's note? Just not any doctor's note, a doctor's note saying that I'm either mentally ill and in a wheelchair? This is ridiculous. I mean, there are people that are blind, there are people that are visually impaired, and there are people that are perceptually impaired, and there are people that are in the normal range. So why is it there aren't different types of housing? This, just according to income, that's not fair. That's classism, and it's ridiculous. The landlords, they get these no-interest loans, they're having their cake and they're eating it too. They're not giving anything to us, except smaller apartments and modern furnishings. I currently have, all my utilities are paid in an expiring use building, and it has a walk-in closet. It's a comfortable space, but I'm in the way of progress. I've been threatened many times, and I really like the small area idea much better than zip codes, because being the only building in a triangular border, that's classism, and it's difficult being the only residents in a triangular border, and the rest owned by BU bullies. And if they gave back the land that they took for $3 and $4, we wouldn't have this problem. I'm a Green Line resident. I have excellent credit. I can't get a landlord to offer me an apartment anyway if he's not obligated to. The AMI is way too high. I never earned $50,000 or above. And I resent being told that I should move to Shittsville or Timbuktu. I've always lived in the greater Boston area. Greater, I mean geographical area. And the Brookline Housing Authority gave me only 2 weeks to find a place. And I moved across the street to the one building on the same Babcock Street, which after I moved there, I was told I either signed the Boston voucher or else move out. And I want to move back home to Brookline. I don't like being surrounded by chaos. And I have to pay for this for the rest of my life, not being able to move back into Brookline proper. I'm a quiet tenant. I like it quiet. I've never had a problem with my indoor neighbors, and I don't want to lose them because I've never had a problem with them. I like that the current building has a mixture of incomes. It's not a lie like these other places. It has moderate income, it has market rate income, it has moderate income, and it has low income. And I'd also like to say that I'm a minority in my building with the lower incomes, born in the USA. Not that I don't know several other languages, I do. I don't have anything against that, but you know, we've all experienced difficult times, and I find it atrocious that our families are a protected class, but when it comes to classism, there's no protection. And the greater area is almost exclusively singles, and we're being pushed out by families, we're being pushed out by people that want lower rents, we're being pushed out by overdevelopment, we're being pushed out by noise. I have a right to live in the city and expect quiet enjoyment of my apartment.
Thank you.
And they don't think so. And so, you know, and the timelines don't line up when it comes to moving either. I can't live in two places at one time in terms of giving the old landlord notice, the new landlord notice, and being able to have an inspection in my apartment, and being able to contact a moving company all within that same month. It's impossible. So, you know, that doesn't work either. So I don't know why you're giving this process back to people that ruined it, because it used to work. I'm proof of that in my building on Babcock Tower with the expiring use, and we're not being allowed to stay with the 13A. Maybe the 13A tenants will be able to stay, but not the Section 8 tenants.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So
oh, and there's no the near elderly either, which there ought to be, because that's when health starts to decline. Near elder, that's a category, and there's no housing for us either. That's 50 and above.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I skipped also in the names. So Kenzie Bach, but also George Lee. I have second half George Lee. Okay, so Kenzie Bach. Kenzie Bach is
actually, I'll speak on behalf of George Lee because he's watching my kids.
right there, actually. No?
Yeah, we actually switched because I had to pick up my kids and bring them with me.
Come on.
So, my name is Amanda Govan. I'm one of the official representatives for Reclaim Roxbury, and I also am speaking on behalf of the IDP coalition that I am a part of. And I would like to thank y'all for actually having this meeting, so y'all can actually see the working class people or the working poor people. I could bring my kids in here, but they're noisy. But one thing I would like for you guys to understand, different people, different creeds, different racial backgrounds, we're all saying the same thing. Communities are being swallowed by greed, and is not necessarily fair. We are culturally rich, but it shouldn't have to be like, oh, because you have rich culture, but y'all are historically broke. It shouldn't have to be that divide. We should have an equal amount of housing for everybody across the city, because I'm going to address the elephant in the room. We have top-class universities. We have top-class hospitals that people come from all over the planet to have their lives saved here. In Massachusetts, they need to pay their fair share of their property tax, so that way we won't be squeezing blood out of the stone of the brown people, you just spoke of the the elderly people, the handicapped people, all of this stuff here. I mean, I understand what you were saying earlier, that you're giving real life examples, but everybody that spoke here, we are a real life example. We're living in the throes of it. I've been living in Lenox Street for about 3 years, and Beacon literally just came in, and they're, cleaning out the building and all of this other stuff, and it's all smoke and mirrors, but we know in about a year or two, we could be forced out of there too, and they're claiming that Lenox Street is one of the safest places left. We don't feel that way. We're already feeling like, okay, this is for the residents here, and this is for this over here, and that shouldn't be the case for anybody, regardless of what color this is. Housing is a basic human right, and that has to be understood whether you want to have children or not. We all have to understand the position that we're in as far as what we work and what we do, but we are all human. We are all human. We should not be classified by how much money that we make or how much money that we don't make. And as long as there will be a wage disparity and a job disparity, there will always be a housing disparity. They're not separate issues. They are all tied together and they're all the same. One thing that has to be realized, this basic right needs to be recognized that we all need, and the AMI needs to be set at 30%, not 70%. Because you're chopping people right at the kneecap, and that's not necessarily fair. We're talking about 50, 60, 70 years of cultural advancement from the Chinese community, the Hispanics from Puerto Rican, Dominican. We talk about the Haitian folks, the Jamaican, folks that call this city home besides New York City. We're one of the top cities here that house a lot of the Caribbean people. But one thing that you have to understand, once you start booting out the culture, then what? You really have to think about that. Besides what color this is, we all need housing. We all need it at a set rate that everybody can afford until you actually start having jobs that pays a living wage, not $10 an hour, because when I was in high school working at Filene's Basement, yes, that is a throwback, but that was when I was in high school. You can't tell me at almost 40 years old with 2 children that I can live off of $10 an hour. I cannot. And with my experience and all of the jobs and internships that I had, I should be paid at least 40. But you're not going to sit here and tell me that I can survive off of 10 working at Save-A-Lot or working at Stop and Shop where they're not even trying to offer me mother's hours. Oh, I got to do an 11 to 7 or an 11 to 6 or a 9 to 7. Like, no. As long as we're going to have a lot of these disparities going at each other and us going at each other, which we shouldn't be, this will always be an issue. But mainly, I would say the AMI needs to be set at 30% and not 70, because 70, you're really reaching, and you're reaching for folks that want to come here for 5 to 7 years, and as soon as something hot and popping in Utah, Seattle, Houston, maybe Miami, because that's where the old folks are at, they'll pick up and they'll go, and they'll leave Boston behind. You need to think about the people that have been here for 30, 40, 50 years. My great-grandma came here from Trinidad, brought her mother here. She passed on here, and she passed on here about 5 years ago. So trust me, I have generations here in Boston. I deserve to be a part of the growth of the city that I was born and raised in, and so do my children. You can, existing tenants that are born here, anybody that chooses to come here, but we have to be honest about this issue. Mm-hmm. We have to be honest, and we have to address the larger entities that are right around the corner from Ruggles. Because Northeastern University, they remodeled. And you can't say that some part of Columbus Ave, this is the nice part, but as soon as you cross over to Tremont Street, there's a disparity.
Thank you.
Everybody can benefit from the remodeling of the city. This city here, there is a way to recognize everybody without the disregard, without the displacement, and especially without the disrespect. And until y'all recognize that, and not make it seem like, oh, it's a black and white issue, it's a money and property issue, it's a housing and home ownership issue. No, it's a human right issue. Everybody here needs housing, because I bet you when you leave here, y'all are not sleeping in a cardboard box in the alley. Let's be real about this, please. 30% AMI, that's my final say.
Thank you. Thank you. Kenzie Bach?
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Edwards, Councilor Flynn, the whole council for having this hearing, and to the advocates who testified so eloquently today, and to Chief Dillon and the city administration. I'm really glad that we're having this conversation. I want to just start by saying how incredibly important to inclusion in our city the inclusionary development policy is. I think we can improve our city's accessibility in a million ways. We can have great language access, we can have job training programs, we can have better schools. And if our families, our low-income families, our families of color, our families that need that language access, the families who can benefit from the opportunities of the city are pushed out, then all of those improvements are for naught, right? So I think, we weigh a lot of things in city government, but there's something fundamental about the question of who gets to live here and be part of our community in the first place. And so I think we just absolutely need to treat this as sort of not just one interest among others, but as a fundamental priority for what Boston's going to be in the future. I just wanted to add my voice on 4 quick points as this conversation about IDP is going on. One thing is just to say I think we do need to be looking at permanent affordability. I think since we're the generation that's experiencing what happens when 40-year expiring use buildings start to expire, I think we have the knowledge to know that punting that kind of thing down the road is very disadvantageous later. And the reality is that can seem like a big ask, permanent affordability, but we have our maximum leverage point at the point that we're doing this permitting. And actually, I think even for development pro formas, it's a long way off. And so we have the opportunity to look at permanence in a more serious way. I think Martin Ritter of NAB referred to this, but having a bias in favor of on-site affordable housing, not that there might never be a situation, Tim Davis alluded to Newcastle Saranac, there might be a situation where we really acutely need to preserve some affordable housing we're gonna lose. But it seems to me like in those situations, we should be looking for other sources of money first to plug those critical holes, because with IDP units on site in new developments, those are units in a lot of our neighborhoods that we really struggle to keep economic diversity that we could never buy on the market. We're not going to be able to bid for those units, but we have the opportunity to claim them with the policy, and I think having a bias in that favor is a good idea. The third thing I'll say, I'm proud to be on the board of the Mass Affordable Housing Alliance, which works for affordable home ownership opportunities in Boston and Greater Boston, and I think looking at ways to bring down the home ownership unit affordability level below the current 80 to 100%. There are ways to do that well, and I think we should be trying to explore more of them. The fourth and final thing is just to say I've worked a lot at the Housing Authority with our lowest income Bostonians, and I absolutely think we need to, as we revisit the IDP policy, look at ways to have lower AMI levels and buy down affordability in a number of our units, because we just see how much those families struggle, and frankly how much at the level one rung above the BHA there's just nothing there for people. So I think as we work on the IDP policy, being bold, talking about the whole ecosystem of housing in the city, and really hearing the voices of the advocates who've been in the room today, we can't afford as a city to miss this opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Martin? Isn't here? Okay. That's all I have on my list. So you had mentioned you had signed up? Okay. All right.
All right.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You're right. Renee, I'm sorry. The next page. Renee, Midzung Chu, and Zahira Truth, before I get to your testimony. Sorry, Renee. Renee? Is Midzung Chu here? Yes. Yes? And? Okay. And Zahira Truth? Excellent. 1, 2, 3, and then, okay.
Hello, my name is Renee, and I'm here to make a statement. I am trying to help, along with Colleen, to help a quadriplegic stay in her home, in her apartment. She has lived there for 8 years, and the reason that they want her to go is because of money. She won't be able to afford the moving price. She's already paying $50 more and is delegating between Eden and just simply paying that $50 more to stay there. In the meantime, the building that they want her to go to, they own, but they're dragging their feet to get her there to a smaller place. There isn't a reason for her to be in a smaller place. She's in a wheelchair, an electric one, being a quad, and she's going to be more confined. She's going to be more isolated, more in her home. That's one thing. And I want to help her. I want to get the legal aid to say, stop this. There isn't a reason for her to go. My opinion, which I do believe you guys really do know, as long as you guys have been counselors, this is not a new issue, okay? The racism, the greed, the new development. This is something that's been going on forever. As counselors, this should have been prevented. You know better. You should be ashamed of yourself for letting this happen. Yes, we're being pushed out. Yes, it seems like you don't care. Why are these condos coming? And the prices of them. Who can pay $10,000? Who can pay $9,000? They are that price. They're also $2,000 and up. We can't afford them. We're not even getting jobs that pay it. $15 will not cut it. $18 will not cut it. Neither will $20. We're already behind. You know this. Just being an employee, I know this. To have what is happening now in our city, having people of every color displaced and not knowing where they are. No emails, no phone numbers, no future address to say, are you in an apartment? Are you with a family member? Are you on the street? You should be ashamed of yourself. I'm so disgusted, angered, and I'm emotional. I don't know how she's going to live, this woman that I'm trying to help, to stay in an apartment that she's been there for 8 years. They didn't mind taking her money. They still don't mind taking her money, but there isn't a reason for her to move. She is not behind in her bills. She's behind in living decently, respectfully, and honestly. You ask for our votes every 2 years, every 4 years. It's gotten worse. Why did it get worse? IMI for Black people is $8. That equals zero. Okay? That's zero. 250 grand for white people. We live in a democratic state. That's a statement I shouldn't have to say. It's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's not independent, but it surely is racism. Classism, racism, it's still there. It's not one or the other. It is everything. You, as counselors, even the mayor, and I have been in his face too, he does not give an answer. But you know better. We have to be better. When I talk to Blacks in a room and whites, because I go to both, we don't have the same issues. Blacks are struggling, white people talking about noise pollution. It's not the same. Yes, you are, but that puts you where you're in poor class, not as a, just poor. That you're with me.
150 of us
yes.
are being thrown out.
Exactly. So I understand what you're saying. Believe me, that's why I say there is a racism, and you are right. There is a casteism too. It should have never happened. Black people have never caught up. We're still struggling. We're still fighting. We're not protected on jobs. We're not protected on health. We don't have equal education, and we don't have diversity. You knew this. You knew this. You knew this, and didn't prevent it. But you asked for our vote. Why should we give it? It gets you where you need to be. It gets us nothing. You should be ashamed of yourselves. You should be ashamed of yourselves for letting this happen. A developer will always have perpetual money coming in. As long as there's rent, they're going to have money. Why are you worried about people who have abundance? Doesn't make any sense. You're intelligent. We all are. I could see it. I've been saying this since the 90s, since I came to the Bostons, I mean. It's not a new story, but we are suffering. Too much. Too much. And I'll say it again. You should be ashamed of yourselves. Why should I vote for any Democrat, let alone a Republican, when I live in a blue state, and this is doing it to all our people, but mainly to people of color? Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Zhang-Chu?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, City Councilors. My name is Mi Zhang. I'm a resident of Dorchester, also a volunteer with Dorchester Not For Sale and a renter. I just wanted to paint additional points to contribute to this conversation. I am in support of the 33% set aside of units being affordable, rental units being in the range of 30 to 70% AMI, as was proposed today, ownership units being 50 to 100% AMI, permanent affordability, and decreasing the 10-unit threshold. We really have to raise the bottom line because we've been in conversations with developers in which they don't budge on amount of affordability. They said the city says 13% and we're meeting that requirement. So really, as city representatives, we have to raise the bottom line. For example, one of the major project, 488 unit project in Dorchester that was recently approved, one of the touted community benefits was that this project had 0.5% higher affordability than the IDP. So really, that's what, 2 or 3 more units. And you have to think 13% affordability means 87% non-affordable. And for 488 units, that's at least 400 units that are market rate. Times that by the number of people moving to the neighborhood, that's thousands of people who have high incomes that are moving to the neighborhood. So undoubtedly will gentrify the neighborhood and displace people that live in the area and surrounding areas. And neighborhoods of Dorchester, where I live, rich immigrant community, Vietnamese community, Cape Verdean, Haitian Creole, Hispanic, Black, African-American households. And if you look around the room, where's that representation here today? So as city representative, please, you need to think about people who aren't in the room as well and vote for them as well. This is also an issue of racial ethnic equity, as many of those before me have spoken about. In Dorchester, in the area in which development is happening, over 80% of households that make less than $50,000 are people of color. So think about that. So we're really, in a way, changing the racial, and racial equity is such an important component of the mayor's agenda as well as your agenda. So really, your vote and decision on this is a racial equity issue. Displacement and gentrification is a public health issue as well, and really raising the IDP is a way in which we could prevent displacement and is a public health prevention tool. Displacement has been linked numerous of studies to stress, depression, poor mental health, poor physical health, from children being moved around in schools, a poor performance in schools leading to further truancy, homelessness, suicide. So in 2015, the US, there was a study by the APHA, American Public Health Association, showed that 929 suicides were due to eviction and foreclosure being the precipitating cause of death. And the number of suicides with eviction or foreclosure was a risk factor and doubled between 2005 and 2010. And in Boston, based on housing court cases brought to the housing court, which we already know is an underestimate of the actual displacement in our city. But based on that data, we know that evictions in Boston have been increasing since 2006, on average of 6.2 evictions per day in Boston on average. Times that by 365 days, that's thousands of families being evicted. And these effects are long-term on the individual, but also on the neighborhood as well. And we already are seeing rent increase in Dorchester. In my neighborhood, a 2-bedroom is already at $2,200 on average or higher. Condos and homes are already at least $500,000, which is definitely above the amount that my husband and I can afford. So we're literally having to look outside of Boston, actually. When we're thinking about building homes, please think about building for families. A lot of the units I see going up are for 1 and 2 bedroom, and these are not families. And these are not accessible to families and to preserving the neighborhood. But also please prioritize households in the neighborhood. In some of our conversation with developers, they say, oh, we have to build housing because there's more, we're bringing more jobs into the neighborhoods. But are these jobs for people in the neighborhood or people coming outside of Boston, and we're building housing for those residents? So really prioritize people in the neighborhood. And the last thing I wanted to advocate for is data transparency. We really need to know what goes behind the numbers. I asked the BPDA to publish all debate-specific parameters that they use to decide the percentage affordability. I think Tim mentioned that he would provide the contract with Landwise, because we as residents, we are knowledgeable. We've been told that, oh, you guys don't understand the construction costs, don't understand how expensive it is to build in the city. Yes, we do. Give us that information, provide data transparency so and work with us. And really, this puts it at the table the parameters that are up for debate, because there's no bargaining unless we understand what goes into that number, and we need to know why that number isn't higher. The economic and demographic context in which the 13% IDP was established originally has changed significantly, hence the purpose of this meeting, but really involve the community members and residents in the conversation and in the numbers as well. And lastly, I've been in presentations where the mayor said he wants to make Boston the best city in the country. And I believe that you want to do that as well. And we're already behind. We're already seeing other cities across the country and even in the state raising their IDP. So really, I know that you understand that IDP is a major tool in which is for public health prevention, but also for economic and racial equity, and really challenge you to be progressive in the power that you have in your role to really make that change. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Zahira Truth, George Lee, Will Justice.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Flynn and Edwards, for this opportunity. I represent the community. I'm a mother of 2. My income is under $40,000 a year, and I live in the South End. I'm not sure how this information is shared amongst the community, but I just heard about it today. So here I am this evening to speak with you. So some of the things that come up for me as a resident, I receive the Metro List email. I look at affordable housing often, and I often think how it's not accessible to me and or my friends and family in my community. I'm a mom, but I also have people who are working class individuals. It's not affordable for them as well when you think about people who are making under $50,000 a year. I also hope that you take in consideration of making more affordable housing in the 30% AMI, because right now, what I see, especially in the Allston area, Boston area, it's usually looking like 80% and 100%. And most people can't afford $2,200 for a 2-bedroom or even $2,200 for a 1-bedroom. One of my concerns specifically as a parent and for other families in the community is that, like the person before me said, is that a lot of the units that are deemed affordable are either studios or 1-bedrooms. And then also I noticed there is not a lot of equity for people that have disabilities, so there's usually just 1 unit that's accessible to people that have disabilities, and I think we need to look at that also. But ideally, let's also think about having 3 bedrooms, because if you're a family of 1 with 2 children, or if you're a family with 2 adults in the home and 2 children, depending on the ages of your children, you can't have 2 children that are opposite sex in the same room. And these are also things that we need to really think about if we're thinking about community members. So that's really what I want to share with you this evening. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. George Lee, will justice?
3 and 4 bedrooms lately. Not so many ones, even the ones are not even addressed.
George Lee, will justice?
Hello. My name is George Lee, and I'm with Keep It 100 for Real Affordable Housing and Racial Justice, which is part of the IDP Coalition. I want to say thanks to all the folks who've already spoken with such powerful stories and testimony. Thank you all for staying until the end to listen to everyone. Thank you, Councilor Edwards, for switching up the usual order of these hearings to allow a lot more community testimony at the beginning. I'm also in support of the IDP Coalition's demands around affordability and want to speak to 3 themes, which is that we need the truth about community need and inequality, we need the truth about developer finances, and we need the truth about what's possible. In terms of the truth about community need and inequality, a lot of times folks who are arguing against strengthening the IDP say, oh, it's not feasible, and so forth. But really the focus needs to be first and foremost on what the community needs in terms of who needs housing, who's rent burdened, who's getting pushed out of the city. The BPD is starting to release some of this data. So to Tim Davis's credit, he's getting out in the neighborhoods and getting input from folks. Also working with that technical advisory committee. So those are recommendations that he accepted from our group. And in some of his slides, he points out the median income of Black households, of Latino households, of Asian households is much lower than white households. And it's that sort of information that needs to get out there so that when we look at an IDP that says, all right, a family of 4 needs to make $80,000, but now we're looking at households of color, the incomes are much less. You know, that's the kind of information we need to root what we should be building our policies around. And that issue of community need is all about the inequities that folks have talked about, because the folks who are making lower incomes and the folks who are homeless and the folks who are getting pushed out are people of color. It's women who are holding down households who are getting evicted. It's queer and trans folks who are homeless and young people, people with disabilities. And so we need to really figure out how we make solutions that actually prioritize justice for folks instead of what's happening, which is prioritizing a lot of the wealthier white folks who want to move into the city now that they've discovered how great the city is. So getting that truth about community need. And specifically, one thing I want to say is I think often there's rhetoric that the city says of, well, BHA takes care of all the poor people. We don't need housing at those levels. That's not who IDP is meant to serve. It's this like middle income folks who are struggling. But I just want to say for every person, every household in the city who's making the 70% AMI, you know, there's 5 households who are making 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10% AMI. And so I think every time that someone here says, oh, that's who the IDP should be focused on, I hope that 5 other people speak up for the other folks who are at the bottom who are getting left out. So having data about community need, San Francisco actually puts out a housing trends report that I encourage you all to look at. It's in terms of just how thorough they are of really looking at who needs housing. Then we need the truth about developer finances, and Mizong talked about this, but developers often cry broke, and they don't want to show us their finances because they know that if we look at their finances, we'll realize they can do more. The developers, both for-profit and nonprofit, who have actually showed us their books, have worked with us and said, all right, you're right, like we can change this number, we can do more affordability. And it's the ones who are hiding those numbers that say they can't do more affordability. I'm hoping that y'all too, as city councilors, can join the technical advisory committee that the city has in order to hold the developers honest around the numbers and to be able to push back. You know, one of the big myths that developers say is we can't do more affordability because everything's so expensive. But actually, when you require strong affordability, it gets factored in because then developers stop speculating on the land. And then land costs can get kept down, and then they can do more affordability. And so those are just some examples of keeping the developers honest by making sure there's truth about their finances. Exactly, they like to hide their profits, the extreme profits they're making, which would hopefully be opened up. And then finally, we need the truth about what's possible. So we know, because developers cry broke, that when we look at what they can actually do, they can do more. In Jamaica Plain, there's been a long track record of the JP Neighborhood Council asking for 25% affordability, and it's not a coincidence that JP is one of the neighborhoods where there's 20% affordability in a number of projects, because when you set a higher bar, you force folks to follow it. If you look at other cities, New York has requirements of 20 to 30%. Toronto has a 30% requirement that they're trying to change to 40%, which includes on-site affordability and also partnering with nonprofits to create social housing. And so we know that more is possible, and that this 13% is nonsense, that you can do much more. We're also getting a lot of units at 30%, 40%, and 50% AMI now because of the organizing in JP and Roxbury. So we know the city can do and can make developers do units at lower income levels. So just getting that, you know, you're going to hear a lot from the developers who will tell us that 33% is impossible, lower AMIs are impossible. So say, prove it to us, show us your numbers, but also here's other examples of other cities that have done it better, and we know we can do much better to make sure that we actually build a just city that doesn't kick everyone out. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Justice, and I don't have any other folks signed up, so if anybody else wants to speak, please just line up. For those who haven't spoken yet, though, I'm going to prioritize those folks who have not spoken yet. No problem. So anybody else who has not spoken yet, ma'am, if you want to stand behind him at the mic, I just want to make sure I have an accounting of who would like to still speak.
All right, so you already know my name is Will Justice, and this stuff that we're dealing with is the same thing that we've been dealing with. Go down Thursday, any day. Any time during the month, go down Thursday to the housing court, and you're going to see who's in housing court. And they all look like me. Well, most of them, you know what I'm saying, the vast majority. As we have a lot of greed going on. We have things that's happening right now. We talk about, you even said, Mr. Flynn, you said maybe we need to look at the capping or rent control. We need to look at that because the people are seeing, okay, this development is coming in. I'm going to capitalize on that. Maybe if I push out these people who've been paying their rent steadily with no problem for years, I can get this extra money from these new people, you know, because they're seeing like, hey, you're allowing these developers to go in, you know, you're going to raise my taxes, my land taxes, I might as well jack up the price. You know, it's very anti-family because they don't care about, I'm not seeing any of these projects that even consider family. Like, you're talking about numbers, you're not talking about people, and that's really the problem. It's like, you know, and last time I checked, it costs a lot of money to educate, clothe, and feed children. So they could have that income, but if they have children, that's going to take a lot from that. So it's like the children aren't even being considered. It's like they're pushing out people who have been in place for years and years and years because they see that there's going to be a profit margin. They see money. They see dollar signs. And that's what it's all about. And it's like we're seeing that, I mean, this pattern is continuing. They're not going to be trying to house the people that are already in the neighborhood. This is not fixed upon the people that's in the neighborhood. They're like, for real deal, they're like, okay, how can we attract people who have these incomes into this neighborhood instead of the people in here? Because they, quite frankly, don't want to deal with us, you know. And when they move in, the first thing they're going to try to do is start giving us orders, because nobody's even spoken about the redlining. I mean, at a certain point in time, I put 02119 on my application. I know I'm not getting that job. Like, I know for sure I'm not getting that job. You know what I'm saying? It didn't even matter what I look like. I know 02119, not getting that job. You know what I'm saying? And this has been going on for a long time. The redlining, this is just basically more redlining, except they're just closing it in. They're closing it in. And they're like, okay, so, well, we want this area now. This is something that's always happened to my community, and it's something that is like, it continues to be the cycle. People can feign ignorance on it all they want to. I mean, when they want to push the highway through, what's the first place that they looked at? Exactly, through our neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? Like, forget you guys. There's so many people got displaced just for a highway, and then we fought and actually won. You know, and some good things came out of, you know, after the highway didn't come through. We got a great school, Madison, but that's about it. You know, what about those? You already displaced a lot of people, and now you're trying to displace the rest. That's what it seems like. And it's like, you can talk about private, you can demonize the private people all you want to, but it's like, it's being allowed. It's being allowed. It's like nobody is saying anything towards what's really happening right now. You know what I'm saying? Come on now, like, look at me, I am a target. I can't even walk in my neighborhood as it is. Just imagine when these higher income people come, you know what I'm saying? I'm gonna be having 911 called on me in my own neighborhood more and more often. You know, just for the simple fact of being just me, who I am. You know what I'm saying? And even if I say, well, I'm from here, that didn't matter back then, you know what I'm saying? When they were harassing me. So it's like, and like they have complete disregard to the families. The families are not even being considered. What, like, name me one project right now that has even said the word family in it. So families are not being considered in Roxbury at all. At all. This is all, everything that we're seeing is nothing but condos. You know what I'm saying? High-priced apartments. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of these places are not even being bought by individuals, they're companies. You know what I'm saying? And they're shell companies in order to do what they need to do in order to make an investment and make some money on it, because it's all about money. You know, it's not about people. In real deal, like I said, where are these people going to work? Where are all these great jobs that people are going to be working at that they're going to be able to afford this stuff? These people are not going to be coming from here. You know, they're going to be coming from other places, and they're going to be pushing us out. I mean, not going to be, they are, because my Roxbury is not the same anymore. And this continues, you know, Roxbury will be another, how they doing the Harlem right now. Look at that. Look at the South End. South End used to be a Blackdale neighborhood. Now it's not. And, you know what I'm saying, Roxbury's next.
Thank you. So for folks who have not testified yet, they're going to be our priority.
I'm
okay, so we have, just to be clear, we have 3.
Were you on the list?
So just, okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Lee Clark, and I think I signed the attendance list instead of the...
Did I call you?
No. So,
I apologize.
So thank you for making space for me, and I realize it's late. I heard about this meeting at the last minute, and there were a lot of things I wanted to say slowly enough so you could understand me, but I'll try and say just a couple of things that may be the real life examples that you asked for earlier. I came down here today despite hearing about this at the last minute because I feel that this is so important to open up this talk to the community, no matter how difficult it is, because I think that as things are progressing the way they're going, people are going to get more and more angry, and the situation is going to get more and more dire, and the way to turn that around is to bring people of all backgrounds into the same room and talk. So thank you. I wanted especially to thank Sheila Dillon, and I didn't know the Fenway CDC would be here, and also the Office of Housing Stability and Helen Nichols and her group. I have been living in Boston area since 1979, and I've moved 3 times in the last 2 years. And I'm a practicing artist, and I have very little money. And I'm 63 now, so I'm earning less. And if I hadn't had the good fortune of having a friend say, apply for this lottery, I don't know what I would be doing today. And I could give examples, and I don't know whether people can write in, since there has to be a limited amount of meeting time. But I certainly will attend these meetings going forward and look for them. Someone mentioned truly affordable, and I think that that's a very big issue. I heard about an affordability meeting in Cambridge, which is one of the areas that I've lived in, And Cambridge does a wonderful job in many things, but I went to this affordability meeting, and when I heard that you had to make what you had to make to get an affordable apartment, I kept saying, do you mean? And they were like, yes. So now I'm in income-based housing, and that's very important for people. We live, I think, in a society that's gone from, in the past, considering the highest people being holier than thou, and now it's wealthier than thou. And we're facing a moral issue here with the devaluation of life and the respect that's needed for every person. And people think only in terms of commodities. I was on my way down here and I saw an advertisement and it said, you could make lip balm, but we can show you how to corner the lip balm market. And I thought, I don't want to corner the lip balm market, but I would like to make lip balm. And why are there not ways for people to live simply in this world? That's, I think, one of the big problems today, is that there are a lot of jobs to be done, and there are a lot of people who would do very simple jobs, but we're living in a society which devalues people who do simple things, you know, like street cleaners and whatever else has to be done in terms of just keeping up our environment. And we see now on a global level where that's gotten us. So we have to ask ourselves why we are in the situation of, I think it's hundreds of thousands of people need income-based housing or affordable housing now, and it's not there for them. So why do we have this need? And it's because, as people said, our society has become so greedy, and there isn't the holding accountable that's necessary of the developers. When I look at the community papers that report on the developments that are going on, I've mostly always seen that the city requests a certain amount of units being affordable, but the developer hasn't held to that, and it somehow slides along to the detriment of everybody who does not have a lot of money. And about the money issue, I really think that when I was growing up, the idea was that if you were smart and you worked hard and you had good values, you would get along in life. And as time progressed, I would say to people about certain things, well, don't you think this could have been done differently? And the answer increasingly was, oh, but it would take too much money. It would cost more. And I'm an artist. I'm not a money person. But philosophy and values and morals are very important. And there was the idea of good old human ingenuity and figuring out ways to do things. And I just want to thank you for being here. I've gone on longer than I wanted to, but it's great that you're opening this up to the community, and I know it's not easy in terms of the amount of time you're spending and all the information you're getting, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Weezy Waldstein. I just wanted to make sure the hearing also recorded the issue of the policies on who gets the affordable units in a neighborhood, because if people from the neighborhood don't have, in some way, preference for those, it can be equally affordable but not contribute to the stabilization. Right. Obviously, there's a lot of compounding fair housing issues, but I think that's a piece that is unresolved and not sufficiently opened up yet. Thank you.
Agreed completely. Thank you.
Hello, Councilor Edwards. Hello, Councilor Flynn. Thank you for your time. I do appreciate it. Some of what I'm going to say is, honestly, frankly, part of a conversation that I had with Councilor Edwards very recently. I came here with the intent on saying something, and then I said, well, no, it's more important that other people in the room share their stories. And I'm glad that I kind of hung back because I heard some very eloquent, powerful anecdotes that really, I hope, inform different players in the room. But then I said, well, I think maybe I do have something to say, and I do think that maybe certain points should be made. So obviously we have a housing crisis. Okay, so I'm from Boston. The fact that we do not have a middle class, or we have an ever-shrinking middle class, is something that greatly alarms me. We talk a lot about diversity. We have to have economic diversity. We have to have a city where people, if they choose to live here, if they work hard, they have that possibility. But I also have to point out that this isn't a question of just building and then deciding how much goes toward affordable housing. I think that housing, while it most definitely is a crisis, I don't think anyone would deny that at this point, that we're not addressing the root problem. And so I would say that in addition to building and very judiciously and smartly deciding how much should be set aside for affordable housing, with an understanding of what affordable housing means, because it's become a term that's been greatly hollowed out. Okay, so we really have to kind of say, what does this mean? What does this term entail? How is it relative to the people who are actually living in the city and who want to live here? But we have to engage a lot of different other people and departments. We have to look at, it's not just simply, we can't just simply say, you know what, we're just going to raise the minimum wage. We can't just simply do that. We have to look at other issues that have driven the housing crisis. Of course, the universities, that's a big one, but we also have to look at the gig economy. And so we have a lot of people that just can't keep up with the rising costs of living, which of course include the rents. So we have people who maybe do great for 2 or 3 months, and then for 2 or 3 months not so great. Then we have people who are underemployed. Maybe they want to work full-time, but they can only find part-time work. Or maybe people have training, great training, but they can only find something that speaks to a certain particular level of their training, but it's not necessarily the highest level. It doesn't allow them to do everything that they can possibly do. So what am I saying? I'm saying that if we're going to address this problem, we need to do several things. We need to once and for all define what affordable housing means, and we should stop using the term. We should also look at the different causes, the different roots of the issue of housing. And I also need to kind of impress upon people, I am fully aware, I'm fully cognizant that there are certain communities that are more impacted by this housing crisis than others. But I feel that in some quarters and some circles that we almost have, we've like fetishized this idea, we've romanticized this idea of who is in need and who is the most vulnerable. I'm telling you that this crisis is such that you have all walks of life that have been touched by this housing crisis. You do have people who are smart, who are capable, but just for whatever reason did not get that high school diploma. But you also have people who have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, or PhDs, and they need housing too. And they find themselves homeless. They find themselves evicted.
Another reason why I think we need to, or why we must solve the housing crisis is because what people don't understand is it's not just about losing the house. It's not just about losing the home, which is an important part of who and what we are. But it's also the embarrassment that we feel. Not that we should feel embarrassment, but we do. The shame, the humiliation, how we're looked at by other people. You know, sometimes people actually lose their personal possessions too. The struggle, the stress of trying to find new housing. And then this time when you're trying to find housing, you have to try to explain to people why you've been evicted. You might also have to explain the credit score too, so I'm glad, Councilor Edwards, that you spoke to that. So it's not just about trying to keep communities together, although that's critical. It's that we need to understand that when we don't fight to keep people in their homes, that there are all kinds of repercussions that follow people later on. And so I guess in closing, what I want to say is we need to bring all different people to the table. Okay? We need to bring the job creators. We need to bring the academics. And most of all, we need to bring the people, but not just the people that we think are affected, but the people who actually are affected. And you're going to find that, as I said, it's a wide range of people. Thank you for your time, councilors.
Thank you. So for anybody who has not spoken yet, for those who have spoken, I'm going to ask you to limit your comments to a minute because this is your second time coming back up.
Good evening again. I heard the city about ITP, about the size of the condos, the dimension, it costs too much, it costs too little. Well, city council take it on that. If they don't provide you copy of the permit, that will tell them how much they pay. That means how much each unit per square inch will cost. That's how the city would give them the permit for. At the same time, city council should be in charge of the blueprint. What they present to the city and what they present to you is a two different thing. Been there, done that, seen it. And if they want it, I come here and testify, and I will prove behind a reasonable doubt they are playing a mind game with both of us. And they don't want to show who is that. City council requests anyone who builds more than 9 units should pull the money in the bank from the beginning to each, and at the end of each phase, the contractor will get paid for that particular part of a phase is done. That way, city will know how much affordable housing will cost, and that will protect the member. At the same time, a lot of them keep dragging. Even though the permit is expired, still they get the job done, and that should be considered. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
That is true. They often do lie. What they write is not the same as what it ends up being. For example, they have different buildings, and then when you want to be a tenant, it's a different building. But no, it depends on which income you're in terms of the units. No, that's in that building. No, but where's the other building? No, you listed that building. No, all the other units are in that building. It's like it's the same thing with not only buildings, but with real estate agents. Real estate A doesn't have any of real estate A's properties, but real estate B has real estate A's properties, and real estate B has real estate A properties. So therefore, you can't get any information about either of them because they can't be accountable to somebody who wants to move in with a Section 8 certificate, even with the excellent credit. And I'd like to say that these programs, these what you call supports, they're not working. I've seen drug addicts galore. I've seen people who ate paper. I saw a woman who took a shirt from a convenience store and was ripping it up in the bathroom with the scissors. Okay? These people that provide these supports, they don't do anything. I know because when I had a frozen shoulder and I couldn't vacuum my apartment, 3 weeks late, 3 months late, they came into my house and they vacuumed for me. She broke a dish. She had to keep wearing gloves even for any clean clothes. How can you clean a house when you can't move anything? There's the bed bug issue, which is on the rise, and it's on the rise because washing is so expensive. And they don't do anything until you have an actual epidemic. And I don't have bed bugs, thank God, but the fact that it's rising because my issue is I do public advocacy. Right. And when someone mentions to me that they have bed bugs, I go home that evening bitten, and I have to put my clothes in the freezer. My freezer shouldn't be a depository for my clothes.
Thank you.
Oh, and here's another thing about zones. I think that should be more comparable for housing rather than zip codes, even though small area is better. Maybe you might take a look at zones in terms of desirability to live and equate that with housing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So at this point, we're going to conclude the hearing on Hearing Order 0144. Thank you very much.